He was clearly a great fighter and a courageous one at that. The term fought to the last suggests a real brutal conflict in which Godwin was one of the last fighting, one of the last standing. And given Vortisax's reputation, it makes Godwin's reign as a warrior even more when we learn that Godwin was actually able to defeat the mighty Vortisax. And we learn this from the legend here in the Pacifist, which is as follows. Long ago, Godwin the Golden defeated the ancient dragon Vortisax and befriended his fallen foe, an event that would give rise to the ancient dragon cult of Pacifist. So Godwin is evidently a respected and powerful warrior, but is also magnanimous and respectful. So not only does he spare the mighty Vortisax who being his foe, but is so honourable that he befriends him, a loyalty that will be repaid in tenfold later in the lake, as we will see later on in this video. So while we don't get many pieces of information about Godwin in this early life, what we do learn about him is pretty interesting. He was evidently a powerful warrior, a powerful demigod, powerful enough to contend with the dragons, but he was also a man of mercy and foresight. His friendship with Vortisax inspired both sides of the conflict and turned a devastating war into an alliance between the capital and dragonkind. As the legend sphere states, this friendship would result in the rise of the dragon cult, and even Lansax, Vortisax's sister, would become the priestess to this cult, and we learn of this specifically from Lansax's blade, which reads as follows. Lansax was the sister of Vortisax. It is said she took the form of a human, to commune with the knights as a priestess of the dragon cult. Therefore, the worship of dragons and the incorporation of their abilities would become highly popular among the late dead knights. We can even see them wielding these powers within the game. And, as is said by the gravel stone seal, the worship of ancient dragons does not conflict with belief in earth truth. After all, the seal and lightning itself are both infused with gold. One of the most famous of these dragon cultists would be dragon named Kristoff, who would be mighty enough to capture Bronzoid, one of the golden lineage. Yet another famous adherent of this cult would be none other than Titan himself. We learn from Titan's dragon bolt with Lansax's savior. It is clear that before pursuing the Titan's flame, he was a distinguished dragon knight. All of this is a part of Godwin's legacy, a tribute to his actions prior to his murder. And as I said at the beginning of the video, it paints a fairly positive picture of this fallen lord. Everything thus far attributed to him is positive, a powerful warrior, and yet a gracious one. And there's one other interesting thing we attribute to Godwin specifically, and this is some sort of relationship developed with his half-brother Nicola, and he himself one of the greatest among their number. So to earn Nicola's respect is to become we get the evidence that Nicola appears to have developed a fondness for his half-brother, but we told that sword that I mentioned earlier. That item reads as follows. A sword made with memory to the death of Godwin the Golden, first of the demigods to die. Infused with a humble prayer of a young boy, O brother, Lord brother, please die a true death. So the reason that we attribute this prayer to Nicola as the most likely candidate is because later we find another connection between Nicola and Godwin at Castle Sol that implies Nicola's enduring empathy for Godwin's position. But we will return to that in a later chapter. The point of highlighting this relationship is just to humanize Godwin further. He wasn't always the lifeless Prince of Death, which shows that he was a figure of such stature and personality that he even gained the love and respect of Nicola, himself being a loved, wise, and respected figure. In totality, this has always given me a very positive image and view of Godwin, a pretty colossal figure in the early years of our tree royal family history, and a proud representative of the Golden Order. So with that being said, let us now turn to the Night of the Black Knight, the event that would transform Godwin and the world forever. So I'm really interested to analyse this event from a Godwin-centric perspective, and get into the feeling of what actually happened, and try and understand the origins of Godwin's purposeful creation. With that said, let us start on what we know from Roger's description of the event itself. It happened over the cultivation of the evolution of so much so it happened that the death of management was this happened during the height of the earth. Whenever it also happened after the height of all the forms of one state, and the heated conflict was restored by the effect of flattening, nourishing, powerful, of what became following the forms of one then, well educated by the gods of the dead, but once they return, yes, dead, how do they what one back to the what's the power of the source of that power is the mountain in the hill and bring it dead or again of the red by a mountain the right for mountains is one way is the only aspect of the one way prior to this, however, as we learn by the on well, it's not broad, but else the one will at that stage the story in certainly set the stage dead, also known as human death, was confined upon the creation of the order, something they learn about by the name of the dead human. So the root of death is clearly part of the great rebellion prior, because Kevin returned to drink the same term is used to describe the chapter fragments of the element brain, time thread as well, the possession of anyone. Further cementing this idea, when we use a mending word at the end of the game, we are incorporating the new element, which is held up of that brain that governs the language. So that is what the element is, the source of power that influences the world and governs its laws. Best illustration of how the element brain is to work is the confinement of the room of death itself. But when it is removed, we very much see the effect of death removal of the room of death becomes a woman and make the world of death itself, made by everyone in the world with the dragon up, a donkey, when death strikes the ass after the death, or it has the children who are there like until the blessings of the power of death. The room of death is exactly the most well, and night, there are some for the main power of the right of the process is right as that one of the
Oh, den är crazy.
right, only right,
Oh,
running into the character for like using power of the unity is intellectually core of the that's not the only thing that gives the right to use the core for it's one of those things that the core that is not present. What I'm referring to is this thing that's the way for not for power of the black thing. And so therefore it makes our law more understand that the ability to support starts being displayed at one point. The fact that the negative that also there's like support not with the before
good.
the result of what
Thank you, Lord.
power of death as to see in the assassin use the power of the red flame, much like Malcolm. In my adult video, which I had been watching, but it wanted to influence that at all, I spoke on kind of dogs were a community of humans, the time that they are the shooting stars, and that they are evidently excellent craftsmen and alchemists. We can see their craft in the main creation of the computer, like the dragon thing, the fingers their blades, puppetry, and now, expertly, black eggs. But no doubt combines knowledge with branding power and sorcery. I mention this because I believe Nazi ingenuity is no doubt what provided the science of magic behind the iconic assassin coat armor, and we learn of the potency of these relics from Roger, who says the following.
Oh, I just got all done.
Indeed, when we meet some of the assassins ourselves, we know that they're making straight as Ireland's again, this is a well-written war for them. So the actual accusable of the Nazis having together sorcery that revolved around the I of course refer to the sorcery developed in Celia, type of sorcery being down, descending from the north. I found most knowledge of most sorceries and secrets of your turn. Aside from this statement, early, you get other evidence that time to time. Of course, most notably, the crypt chair, which is also incorporated into Celia's coat of arms, not to mention the presence of a Northman and sorceress guarding the chair. Finally, the Celian sorceries themselves are called night sorceries, tying it closely to the North, Latin word for night. And if that still doesn't convince you for some reason, one of these Celian night sorceries, Night Maiden Smith, taught by Gary, is explicitly a Nocturne practice. Not only is it a spell utilised by the Night Maidens of Nocturne and named after them, but it also says the following. One of the night sorceries of Celia, kind of sorcery. Below Celia, the eternal tribute of Nocturne sleep. This sorcery originates in the maiden of that place. So now that we have firmly tied Celia and its night sorceries to the necessities, let us now consider the practices actually developed within this town. Well, having a look at it, we quickly come to realize that these sorceries are developed with the intent of making assassination. For example, the night shard being involved, one of the main sorceries of Celia, tied in the sorcery. The Celian sorcerers were assassins, and instead they often come to their deadly. And so we begin to get an idea of how the Black Knight assassin could have been developed as a concept, especially when we look at the most pertinent sorcery, Unseen War, which can Lee is no doubt like the assassins of before. I think that this is again one of the most satisfying and well-published reports I have made. If anything that makes up the Black Widow assassin has in fact existed back before, and is a holistic combination of Nazi, scientific, and magical developments. We have the Finger Slayer blade, which explains the knots and human tension for forging these weapons. We have the Night Sorceries of Celia that can help explain the development of invisibility. And finally, the Black Knight assassins themselves are all nimble female warriors, extremely reminiscent of the all-female bodyguards of the Night Knight, the sorceress. That all makes it feel real. The Black Knight assassins aren't just a plot like the show or bit. They are a combination of cultural development and practical, and I really appreciate this detail. There's also a very cool thought that the Knight of the Black Knights was partially gestated from the kind of sorcery that seems trivial at hiding secrets. Let us return to the assassination itself. The way in which these blades were brought to bear against Gordon is unreal. The assassins did not merely stab Gordon, they seemed to carve his flesh instead. Indeed, this taking place in the entrance of Macron, which Gordon was restrained, so the rim of death can be carved into his flesh. This carving of the hologram is actually well described by Pia, who says the following. For this practice of the rim of death to actually work, the curse mark must be carved in full upon the intended victim. This is further illustrated by the other victim of the Knight of the Black Knight, Granny. She herself has another half of this holographic carved into her original flesh, found atop the tower in the hernia. The curse mark filled from her body gives us more details as it reads the following. Curse mark carved into the discarded flesh of Granny the Witch, also known as the half-wheel moon of the century. This curse mark was carved at the moment of death of the first demigod, and should have taken the shape of a circle. However, two demigods perished at the same time, breaking the curse mark into two half-wheel moons. Rani was the first of the demigods whose flesh perished, while the Prince of Death perished in soul alone. So we can physically see the curse mark moving Rani's flesh, again reinforcing the fact that not only are these blades imbued with death, but to take the intended effect, the curse mark of death means to actually be carved onto the victim's flesh, as in both Carter's Colossian flesh and Granny. However, we learn some specifics to the outcome of the Knight of the Black Knights. The wounds on both Godwin's and Granny's bodies are halves of the one mold that, put together, would form the circular hole of the curse of death. Now, the fact that this item description says should have mainly likely the intent behind the attack was to fully kill Godwin with both halves of the wheel, so he died in soul and in flesh. That it was an accident that led to Rani dying in body when the wheel fractured. Yet this doesn't appear to be the case, and it appears the breaking of the wheel was actually intended by Rani, as she says the following.
But I would not acquiesce to the two fingers. I storm the road of death. See mine own imperial flesh. Casting it away, I would not be controlled by that thing.
So I'm quite sure this nuance is clear to most people at this point in the game's life cycle. But this dialogue heavily implies that Rani planned for the Knight of the Black Knights to go the way it did. Her real objective was actually to slay her own imperial flesh. Her flesh is even described as discarded flesh in the curse mark item description, suggesting that she got rid of this flesh. How she actually achieved this result and broke the wheel is an interesting process to consider, as she clearly seems to have the half wound, the other half carved into her back vertically. It's hard to get your head around, but my belief is that while the assassins were carving the rune into Godwin, Rani was committing a similar act upon herself, and the fact that happened at the same time broke the hologram condemning Godwin to shoulder the burden of the soul death path, while Rani benefited of the dead body. In the Paramount description, it describes the creation of the world in the following way. However, two dead bodies perished at the same time, breaking the Paramount into the use of that word is chain of causality, which is essential, and it calls dead bodies died simultaneously that it really takes when the talented from dead into past, one died of flesh, and one died of soul. That only one that passed again was being killed, and the body as a system to the other half, which remains. This must tie up with what was rapid and the back. He is trying to favor all lives, as it appears that when she was chosen as a carrier, she was in some perspective of the way bound to it, and not able to follow the path of her was reason. But by doing this, by clearly forcing the world into her desperate freedom, she condemns a man to a wretched fate, and the anybody would cause the spread of the death group. However, it is the first step in her ultimate goal of severing her connection to her fingers, and we do see her carry on this path in her quest. He first slaves her flesh, then kills and swings beings in shadows,
What is the Lord about track?
loving her
Hey, it take you
to
God.
and pass off and keep them safe as an imperial If this is the case, then Gordon's death is more
Get a
tragic,
little
as it makes him seem as mere collateral damage to Randy's plans. And the fact she has essentially
This is or summon against money.
head as a soulless fool is something people should consider if they view Rani as a hero. And while I think this is true from Rani's perspective, as in this was
It's not the
objective of the Knight of the Black Knight, I don't think it is as simple as this for the rest of the conspirators involved. I believe they had different ideas as to what would happen. So let's try and analyse the aftermath of the Knight of the Black Knight and what the other motivations may be for the other conspirators. So I do want to see what follows if my own speculation based on the silence of storytelling and the So the first co-conspirators are of course the Black Knight assassins themselves. Were they aware of Randy's intentions? It would certainly make sense if they did, given both parties want to bring out an ancient name. And yet, despite this, I do believe there's evidence that the assassins and Randy are the loggerheads. Firstly, Randy asked us to retreat to find the straight blade in the city of Knockdown. Consider why we would actually need to do this if Randy was still allies with them not. Surely we would help her this too. We would help her achieve the age of men. Furthermore, Rani doesn't even know where the city of Nocron is. Again, a curious state of affairs for someone supposedly allied with the Nox. And then there, of course, is the bizarre series of events that involve Rani's counselors and their attempted and actual deaths at the hand of the Black Knight assassins. As Blythe seems to be surrounded by Black Knight assassins, as if they have tried to kill him, and Yuji's body is similarly surrounded by the corpses of Black Knight assassins. So I had once considered that this was Rani cleaning house, that she had commanded the assassins to take out Blythe and Yuji. And while I am more or less certain that she turned Celadus into a puppet as an ironic punishment for his plans for her, I don't think this makes sense that she would just kill the others, given she says this near the end of her quest.
Now I can finally stand before them. This is farewell, my dear. Caroline and Luigi. I love them.
They are our childhood friends, and as ruthless as I see Rani to be, I very much she could bring herself to slaughter these two in cold blood, directly at least. Leaving them to their face is another matter entirely, of course. So what do these attacks mean? Well, I speculate that Rani misled the Black Knight assassins. These attack on Rani's people as an attempt at retribution. Remember the curse mark item description. It says, should have taken the form of a hero, as if that was the intention behind those who were targeted. I believe that the Black Knight assassins believed they were truly planning to slay the gods, to overthrow the Earthtree order, and to pick up the Godskin apostasy, and the Romite Creed had failed. Godwin, as a leading member of the royal family, would have been a juicy target for them in their plans to overthrow the greater will, a great act of revenge for their punishment at the hands of the greater will. In my Eternal City video, I spoke on the potential connections between the Eternal Cities and the Glomite Queen's apostles. And while e.g. burning in the Black God Slayer flame could be a mistake, I am of the belief that the Godskins were an Eternal City creation. I won't go into it in much detail as I did in that video, and again, I recommend it, but essentially the fascination of the Nox with creating artificial life is very much a facet of their society. Most notably, the Albanorics, which we learn were a creation of the Eternal City from some cut Nox dialogue. Artificially created life ties in with the description of the Godskins found in the Swaddling Rock, which to me implies accelerated growth and hand-rearing by the Glomite Queen herself, suggesting they aren't completely become Godskin, rather they are created. Then there's of course the implied connection between the Black Knight assassins and Godskins working together. This is at E.G.'s murder scene, of course. Scattered around his body are the corpses of Black Knight assassins, with E.G. evidently killed defending himself. However, he is not burning in the red flame of death's death, the weapon used by the assassins. Rather, he is burning in the black flame of the Godskin apostles, suggesting it was one of their number who got the final blow on the troll. I think this suggested connection between the Godskin movement and the Black Knights lays bare their intentions to bring about the deaths of the gods and overthrow them, not help Rani further her own agenda. And while the Nox armor set tell us that they too want to bring about the Age of Stars, I imagine they wouldn't take kindly by being used by another usurper wanting to take the throne for himself. Whatever the motivation or reason behind it, I think it is clear now that the Eternal Cities and Rani are at loggerheads, and it's further backed up by Electro, the leader of the Black Knight assassins, being imprisoned in the Moonlight Altar, a carrion ever jailed. I speculate that post-night of the Black Knights, having used them to achieve their goal, Rani imprisoned Electro for the assassins to take the heat, which is why we see them scattered throughout the land, hiding in the fringes and deep places of the world. No wonder we need a star to break into Doctron. Quite a tangent. But now let us look at another cultist character and what they aim to get out of this. Praetor Rykard. We learn of Rykard's involvement via the blasphemous plot description, which reads as follows. On the night of the dire plot, Rani rewarded Praetor Rykard with these graces. Should the coming trespass one day transpire, they would serve as a last resort foil, allowing Rykard to challenge Malekith the Black Blade, the Black Beast of Death's Death. So it looks like Rani got Rykard into this plot, and given what we know about him in his later, more overtly blasphemous years, it is easy to see him as an obvious fit. Much like the Eternal City cohort, I believe that Rykard was just wanting to strike against the gods and Martha. He doesn't have any connection or care to the Age of Stars. Rani's motive for bringing her brother in is pretty clear. He is just a last-minute defense against Malekith. And then, of course, we need to discuss the possible involvement of Queen Martha in the plot itself. Now, I do discuss this possibility in my Martha War video in far more depth, so please go watch that if you are interested in more detailed analysis. But in short, as I'm sure most of you are aware, the main evidence for Martha being involved comes from the Black Knight assassin armor set that describes the women as human, closely associated with Martha, as well as certain dialogues that imply a sort of utilitarian view of her own children. As I said in my Martha video, I am not someone who personally believes this to be 100% true, yet I do also acknowledge the legitimacy of the theory, especially given the weapons used in the Black Knight assassin armor set. And so, with that said, if she was involved, what do I believe to be?
So I wonder,
Well, as said in my previous Martha video, the thoughtful read quoted by the usual half, obviously scrolls and tablets found in Martha's chambers, with the declaration she makes regarding studying the death of the Golden Order.
To search the depths of the golden through understanding of the proper way. Our faith Those blissful early days of blind belief are long past. My comrade, or must you falter?
In my mind, if we are to entertain the idea that Martha murdered Roland's son, I believe it is a reaction to her study and identification of the flaw in the Golden Order, and that it was a calculated move to expose this flaw that she had identified through her studies. This flaw, of course, was the absence of death, a glitch in the system that did not rectify itself when the rune of death was reintroduced through Godwin's murder. And so with that said, let us actually examine the resulting effects of Godwin's murder, the spread of the death rune, and the rise of the Prince of Death. After his murder, the corpse of the fallen demigod was buried in the deep of death, something we can pick up from the Prince of Death postulate. In your first playthrough, most likely the first sight you get of Godwin is the intro cinematic that shows him being murdered by the Black Knight assassins. Yet despite this gruesome scene, you get the picture of a beautiful godlike figure in a muscular physique and flowing golden locks. This is also in line with what we see in the story trailer, which again could have been invented as the first sight of the Golden Prince. So this later becomes very unsettling when players get their first look at what we learn to be a visage of Godwin, hidden at the bottom of Stormfield Castle. I genuinely find the look of this face subconsciously disturbing and repulsive. Something deep within me does not like this face. It feels wrong. And when they look at the matrix in part of this chapter, you'll see this is exactly the same. It reminds me of an oyster with a small physical skin, and it is distinctly unnatural and incredibly well done. And indeed, the oyster does seem to be spot on, because we will see the full aquatic form of God later,
What
as
business
well
might
as
you
tying
have in
in
such a place as
with the
this?
relevance of form
I
of
hardly think
Godwin
you're here to
and
take
the
on
use
yourself
of
a
death.
considering
It
that
is Rogier
flesh
who
and
later
bone
confirms that this one
Your
face is a
timing,
relic
though,
of
is
the Knight of the
impeccable
Black
as ever.
Knight, a
I've
visage
been
of
making
Godwin.
just the thing for you on my
Indeed,
journey
Roger
here.
warns us away from
Take
this
it.
space because it
I'm
doesn't
sure
even
it'll suit you
possess
to a
the
T.
death type of Godwin, the power of the Prince
No,
of Death,
it's hardly more than a
something
lukewarm
Roger
here.
himself
I
was
won't be
born
able to
foul
take on my
of,
body such that
and
it'll
again
never crack
witness
again.
through his bloodstream.
Perhaps I'll head
And
eastward.
now the death light
There's an old
rises
saying
through
I've
his
caught
body.
wind of.
He is
Above the
saturated
lofty
by the
clouds,
power
the icy
of death.
giant's peak doth soar.
When we finally do
Here
find Godwin,
lieth
the
the
true
flame
Godwin,
room,
in the depths of the
which
land
ever
between,
burning
the
roars.
deeper depths, it is made all the clearer that the visage we see under Stoneville is a spot-on replica, more or
Perhaps
less,
I'll head
of
eastward.
Godwin's true
There's
face.
an old
And
saying
indeed,
I've caught
this
wind of.
visage is actually
Above
just
the lofty
one of many
clouds,
faces
the
of
icy
Godwin.
giant's peak
These
doth
aren't just
soar.
relics or
Here
bits of skin,
lieth the
these are
flame
considered
room,
to be
which
true
ever
copies
burning
of
roars.
Godwin's face. For example, the face under Stoneville is actually referred to as a visage of the Prince of Death,
Perhaps I'll head
something you can
eastward.
see from the Prince
There's
of
an old
Death's
saying
postulate
I've caught
that we
wind
pull
of.
from this very
Above
page.
the lofty
It reads
clouds,
as
the
follows.
icy giant's
The
peak
effective
doth soar.
postulate came
Here
from facial
lieth the
flesh.
flame of ruin,
It is said this
which ever
postulate
burning
came from the
roars.
visage of the Prince of Death, he who used to be called Godwin. So this is actually facial flesh. It's a real replica of Godwin. It initially appears to be a confusing contradiction, given we find the true face later. But Godwin's appearance is superbly analysed and explained in two videos from Zero the Witch. They are Godwin Prince of Death and the terrible truth about Godwin videos. I also just want to let you know at this stage that Julie's work will be heavily referenced in this section, as a lot of the details we learn of the Prince of Death's influence and matter comes from the environment of storytelling, and Julie has by far the most prolific subject in regards to Godwin. Let us first deal with the replica visage that we've just been discussing. In the video, The Terrible Truth About Godwin, Julie identifies that Godwin's image is spreading throughout the land between, as we can see from the death of Gil Iglo in areas where the death group has spread, even spreading as far as Gulag, suggesting this isn't a growth in non-consent, it is more like a curse spreading in the land between. But we'll discuss that thematic in a minute. These eyes are clearly reminiscent of the Prince of Death's true eyes, but we can also see his eyes on the throne surrounding him with death, giving us the true nature of these strange eyebrows found spreading with the death group. Millie therefore suggests that the Godwin visage in Norville could very well be a more advanced type of this growth that has grown from beyond just the eyes, that has become an almost full replica of the dead predator. And I agree that this is the most satisfactory type of experience, as I'd long considered this to be some kind of vestige of the true godling. And given that this is actually made of facial flesh, it seems to be that these eye growths or growths spread throughout the land between may well all turn into true copies of the prince's dead. This does also seem to be backed up by the fact we see his visage duplicated elsewhere. Firstly, in the cysts and pustules, you can see the outlines of Godwin's face. But of course, there's also the crabs that we find in all the plateau and
More
the
than
and again, we know
Elisa.
that these are all
Again.
waterlogged areas, and we will be able to
Wow.
soon. These crabs straight up have the visage, face of Godwin upon their back, eyes included.
Yes,
Again,
of course.
reinforcing the fact that Godwin is
She's my
spread
favorite
his
character.
face, his body, far and wide, through the death route and through the sweating light of the spotted death. Does he see through all of his eyes? Does he feel all these faces? The implications of this are very clear. And given enough time, could Godwin see through the entire world, turning it into Godwin? It is definitely suggested that this is the case. It is an unending spread, and the spread of the death route has already transformed patches into the world. Before we go further, we do need to talk about Godwin's appearance in general, given we are going to talk about the dramatic overlays in the next part of the chapter. In a very surface level analysis, we of course get the immediate and the fish-like tail that is completely false. And just as a quick personal note, I absolutely love this because Godwin is one of the best designed parts of the movie. I will talk more about the problem, characters about the description, in the introduction. At the first stage of the trumpet bell, the first stage of the mind, the original carrier of the top of the dwarf air, no present in the straight of the world, also of the village of the world, or a number of the top of the world. In order to experience the project of black. Again, two is delivered in this book, and there's one and this idea is again, and one of the Japanese mortality, but passion one is meant to bring calamity, and this doesn't end with part of the mortality of those dead. And so this sacrifice is over. However, there is more thematically. At this point, we're going to reference another point these are effective, and specifically of the ideas of pollution and taboo, finding them themselves. Video forms or many of the recent Eastern cultural interests find themselves held in the Western culture mess. And in general, Asian channels held the video essays from of your favorite games, so please go and check out those ones. The silent film video is all of the content all time. The aims are analyzed, they're also very useful in analyzing the Gary is played by the state of the planet caused by their mistake. Sometimes the same dead or form. The Acer was found in describing the Gary as a process of time, transition between life and death. When he figures and thought, yet he years, he dead. Silent film, the writers from very quickly demonstrate the Gary that a one in the first film, the witness the vantage part of the house door, now front out, crossing the benches because all under the Gary. In film 1, some of the images are representative of that production cause, of the Gary of the button of God, such as magic, rock, or energy. And if it doesn't happen, there's like God that feels the corruption of the planet. The straight up quote case of it, which is talking about the fortune of Gary, says, and I quote, the Gary will also corrupt others. For example, the prince of war corrupts the environment directly, and this work is a seabed for magic and other entities, real and virtual. If you touch it, you will also get the Gary, and you will spread it entities. Does this sound familiar? The presence of a force causing corruption that spreads to others, to then spread it further. This is why Godwin's appearance is so deeply corrupted. He is a living corpse who has been buried, but his corruption has spread. He has crossed the boundaries of natural life. The moment his soul was obliterated and his corpse was left behind, he became a seabed with corruption that pollutes the land. Godwin, through no fault of his own, has crossed these sacred bounds, not only between life and death, but outside the boundaries set by the golden order. And he will continue to be a source of impurity, a source of the guide, until he is destroyed or is brought back within the bounds of what is accepted. And as Zuli points out, there aren't just those who live in death, but there appears to be new life forms that are created by contact with the death prince himself, spreading this corruption even further. The example Zuli gives are, of course, the basilisks that have clearly had their eyes modified from prior safety to be more in line with Godwin's eyes in this case. In addition, their connection to Godwin is made all the clearer by their location in areas connected to death, such as in the deeper depths, the realm of the Prince of Death. They wield the death blade of the Death Prince, again spreading that corruption. And they also have infernal features, tying them to the water beings, which we'll look at in the next chapter, and the Pacifist features of God himself. You'll see his arms are very similar to the arms of the basilisk. They, of course, aren't the only life forms capable of inflicting death life. There are, of course, the mysterious and confusing worm faces. These are the tree-looking humanoids, with worms burrowed into their faces. The connection to Godwin is, of course, clear from their appearance. There are maggots or mealworms in their face, very heavily connected to death and decay. They also spread the death light. In Zoe's video on them, she interestingly identifies the fact that the file name for these enemies in the game is Genesine, which is a French term referring to the uprooting of trees. Now this does line up nicely with the appearance of life faces. The worms look like the roots of upturned trees. And I would suggest that their locations are also significant. The two main areas that we find them in are A, affected with death light, and B, have trees. This is the location in Farm Missoula and Altus Park, respectively. So my most likely explanation for their appearance is that they are somehow connected to the areas that are affected with death light that also have trees. Farm Missoula does have the infection of Godwin, so this area we find them in is also afflicted with the death light. Is it possible they are actually trees that have been corrupted? They are very tree and wooden looking. Otherwise, of course, we could have just taken their appearance from their surrounding environments and are pure creatures of corruption. This is, of course, my speculation on Zoe's video and what we see of the environmental details, but it is one that satisfies my understanding of these to a degree. Now, while I'm sympathetic to Godwin in his plight, this does all paint a terrifying picture about his reach and the transformative, corrupting nature of his power. So with that said, let us look at the spread of his corruption in more detail in the next chapter. The spread of the death root was facilitated by the manner in which the body was handled and buried. We know from the Prince of Death's pustule that he was buried at the roots of the grape tree, as it reads as follows. It is said that this pustule came from the visage of the Prince of Death, he who used to be called Godwin. As part of the demigod, it is said he is buried deep under the capital, at the earth root. Indeed, this obviously marries up with what we see in the game. Godwin's corpse slumped against its very roots in the deep root depths. While this may seem like a pretty silly idea in retrospect, it does make sense with the lore of the world, given we know from numerous sources that the Erdtree burial was the idealized form of honouring the dead, where the dead were returned to the roots of the great tree. Yet it was this connection of his body against these roots that facilitated the spread, something that we have confirmed by the description of Deathroot itself, which reads as follows. On the night of the dire plot, the stolen rune of death enabled the first death of a demigod. Later, the rune of death spread across the land of the king to the underground roots of the great tree, sprouting in the form of Deathroot. And as expected from Software's masterful environmental storytelling, this too is reflected by what we see within the game. At Godwin's throne, we see the Deathlight spreading from his shattered form and infecting the roots of the great tree to spread throughout the world. And of course, it is important to comprehend what this Deathroot really is. The item description says it all. The Deathroot is the fragments of the rune of death that was stolen on that fateful night. These are the fragments of the fragment that was stolen from Malcolm, and as such it explains his motivation in working with the hunters to retrieve this Deathroot. He is trying to undo his mistake, to restore the rune of death proper, and thus restore the golden order. Durant actually hungers for the rune of death, for the Deathroot, because he feels the rune of death since it is bound within his own flesh. And we learn from Malekith's Black Blade that it was actually bound within his flesh after the night of the Black Night. And as such, he hungers for it to be complete because it is part of him as well. Tragically, for Malekith, some bells cannot be unrung. And while we return all to Deathroot, Malekith realizes that the affliction of the Wheel of the Centipede has spread too far and has seeped into the very soil of the Lancer tomb. The rune of death can no longer be restored.
It is all consumed. Still, I have not senses. Not merely senses.
So this is where we return to what happened to Godwin on the night of the Black Night. Godwin only sees half of the blade of the centipede, half of the ring of death. This half concerns the death of the soul of England, and said Deathroot obviously contains the same half, hence why those afflicted by Deathroot are dead only in soul, but still exist in a corporeal sense. They literally live within death. The reference to this as the mark of the centipede is obviously quite fitting for a couple of reasons. Firstly, and most obviously, this half of the ring does indeed resemble a centipede. But a more relevant connotation and to why it's probably shaped like a centipede in the first place from a design perspective is the more the ideas of rot and stagnation, a cultural understanding from Japanese Shinto, where flowing water is seen as good, pure, and representative of life, where stagnation is seen as corruption, death, and decay. In short, the idea of purity and the ever-flowing cycle of life in Shinto is commonly represented by flowing water of that flowing cycle of life. So conversely, stagnant water is used to represent the perversion or halting of said cycle. Pests and insects thrive in stagnant water, and thus they are often used to depict corruption and rot. And again, this is something commonly seen in the first Silent Hill, in the form of moths, cockroaches, and grub. Again, as aptly portrayed by Acer, stagnant water is another thematic indicator of humanity. And to quote Acer directly once more, they say the following: flowing water is life, and so is the food. Conversely, still waters are death. Now, in Western culture, we are of course familiar with flies, insects, and maggots being a symbol of death and rot and decay. And indeed, this is represented by the flies swarming around Godwin's decaying form. However, it is important to remember that a Japanese team made this, and so it's great to understand the cultural context behind these thematic designs. And so, with the understanding that flies, insects, and other types of pests are representative of Gary and stagnant waters, we again move to the centipedes. Centipedes fall within this category of a life form that thrives in decay and stagnant waters. And thus, in Japanese culture, Centipedes are often used to symbolically represent stagnation or rot or pollution. Of course, the best representation of this is in from software media in Secular, where the presence of centipede parasites are meant to denote the stagnation and pollution of the divine waters, best illustrated by the monks of Central Temple, who are literally overtaken by parasitic centipedes. The association with centipedes is made even more interesting though when we consider the golden centipede, which reads as follows: the golden desiccated remains of a centipede, material used for crafting items, kept as a fetish by the golden order of fundamentalists, especially the hunters of those who live in death. As such, they're found near churches or similar. Now, a fetish is usually a talisman or some other object used for spiritual protection, and given it is a golden centipede, the mark of those who live in death, it makes sense that the golden order fundamentalists would use this when hunting those who live in death, given it's a golden inversion of their enemy's symbol. This is why the half-moon of the centipede is representative of those who live in death, because they are literally stagnant ones of life. They are stuck living in death, stuck at one part of the cycle of life. They are existing outside the boundaries of the established laws. They are an extension of the pollution spilling from corpus to corpse. They are gregarious, and so they associate with imagery of centipedes and insects in sense. The idea of gregarious and crossing sacred bounds is why so often those who live in death are described to be outwit the golden order, such as in the description of the holy water pots, which reads as follows: highly effective against those who live in death, even preventing them from rising again. The golden order has no mercy for those who trespass beyond life bounds. It's again the idea of trespassing beyond the boundaries, leading to pollution and stagnation, and the idea of their existence outside the bounds of order, leading to a pollution of the order, is reflected in the language of the hunters such as Bede, who states the following:
Following on the guidance of the great golden ring, those who live in death fall outside the principles of the golden order. Then their existence sullies the guidance of God, tainting its truth. And so it is that vermin must be exterminated, down to the very last.
And the ideas of stagnation make sense why the areas we find those who live in death are in stagnant waters. And it also maybe helps explain the aquatic Pavia marinas, who seem to be an infection vector for the death group. It is just another thematic manifestation of the themes of stagnation and gregarious. Now, while the half-moon of the centipede, being death only in soul, helps explain the undead of those who live in death, I feel it is only part of the equation when it comes to explaining their existence. As we have just discussed, those who live in death are essentially a glitch in the system. And for this to occur, for a glitch to occur, there has to be a fault in the golden order.
You may find this peculiar, but I discovered something in my examination of the Knights of the Black Knights. These souls have committed no offence. They have every right to life, only they happen to touch upon a flaw in the order.
Like Roger, I actually have a lot of sympathy for those who live in death, and the Dustboard ending was the first one I chose, despite also having Granny's ending ready to go. Roger correctly states that those who live in death have happened upon a flaw within the golden order. It is not perfect, as the fundamentalists would have you believe. And this flaw will be one that those familiar with my channel will of course heard me mention many times, as in my gold mask and marathon videos. That flaw being the removal of death and finding of it. And this is fittingly described by the mending room of death 20, which reads as follows: formed of the two holographic half-wheels combined, it will embed the principle of life within death into order. The golden order was created by confining death in death. So the very foundations of the golden order are built upon an order absent death. And we see this effect on the denizens of the world, a world where nobody dies. It really is a typical state of affairs. Unending life sounds great in theory, but in usual FromSoft fashion, we are quickly disabused of that notion. And when you peel away the surface layer and grandeur of the golden border, you can see it as fundamentally broken. For while it is true that those who are with death are stagnant, so are those within the order. No one ever dies within the order. How is that any less stagnant than those within death? The removal of death and then the murder of Godwin are the two main events that broke the world, as much as the shattering of the Elden Ring did. And indeed, Rogier seems to agree with that statement, that these were the powerful events that led to the world becoming crooked.
I once wished to become a scholar, you see. I spent many hours scouring the archives for knowledge of that fateful thought. The world has grown crooked, and if you intend to put it to rights, you better understand what happened to make it this way.
And yet, there are those looking for a workaround, a way to undo and reverse the corruption, rather than simply purging those who are afflicted. And so it's time to look at those who undo the corruption and restore Godwin to his former glory. We have already covered the fact that Fortisax and Godwin developed a close bond due to their mutual respect in the War of the Dragons, and Godwin's sparing of the former's life. But the depths of this bond isn't really illustrated until we get to the latter parts of the game, and we find Fortisax for ourselves, who to me is one of the most heroic characters in the entire story. Fortisax's remembrance reads as follows. After Godwin the Golden became the Prince of Death, the ancient dragon fought long and hard against the death within its companion. Alas, victory was never achieved, and its only reward was corruption. And this is indeed how we find Fortisax, renamed the Lich Dragon, due to the fact the ancient dragon himself has been suffused with death. Even the ancient dragons are not free from its pollution. This is apparent from his appearance. All other ancient dragons have a sort of golden beige hue to them, including his own sister. However, Fortisax is now stained black, and you can see how well the design team have done here. He isn't just a black dragon. He still actually has his gold scales underneath if you look carefully, but it's more like he is stained with a black suit over the top, the mark of death. Much like when Rogier becomes suffused with death, Fortisax also seems to be frightened of light, the blight even bursting from his eye socket and through his skin. And it is no wonder Fortisax is now called the Lich Dragon. He is a dragon living within death. What is interesting is that it again shows the real corrupting power of the death, this pollution caused by the crossing of boundary. The extent to which Fortisax is afflicted is pretty eye-opening, and it is elaborated on by the Death Lightning incantation, which reads as follows. Incantation that channels the power of the ancient dragon Fortisax, now corrupted by death. It is said that this golden lightning was wielded by Godwin, and so this lightning was actually once Godwin's power that Fortisax now channels. And the corruption of death is so powerful that even this lightning is afflicted by it, showing it as a true metaphysical curse. And this is all well and good, but when you fight Fortisax, you may have some burning questions. Why is he so corrupted? And where the hell do we fight him? Well, Fortisax's remembrance implies that Fortisax is within Godwin's mind, within his soul, battling within the death in his own companion's body. Now, this is a confusing concept to wrap your head around, but it does appear to be that there is a realm within Godwin that represents being within his corrupted body. We can enter this realm ourselves at the end of the quest, when we are invited to enter the deathbed dream. Now, given Thea is a deathbed companion, this must be Thea's dream, bridging her mind to Godwin's, and so we use her as a medium to connect with Godwin's mind, and that is how we end up fighting Fortisax, or something along those lines. We'll discuss it more in the later chapter regarding Thea, where I will also talk about why we have to fight Fortisax. If this does represent a realm or pocket dimension within Godwin, it does let us know the true extent of death saturation. The sky itself seems to be covered in a death light. And it is in here, in this hellish realm of death, that Fortisax has spent a long time fighting against the death, trying to push it back, trying to cleanse his good friend from the inside out. Yet, as should be obvious from the spread of death in the world at large, and the suffused nature of Godwin's mind represented by the skybox, this was a doomed endeavour, and Fortisax has paid the price for his bravery. Yet it is one of the most heartwarming stories in the game, and I see Fortisax as a true hero. It wasn't just Fortisax who felt great sorrow at Gordon's fate. We of course now return to the Golden Epitaph as promised at the beginning of this video, which is most likely tied to Emperor. More specifically, we can make this tie-in via the specific ghost dialogue from Castle Sol. That does bring us to the location of this game, Castle Sol, a bastion that appears to be the cult of and this is further supported by the great the eclipse of course is elsewhere in the Elder Brain, with the mausoleum and their name, and the eclipse press ratio yielded by the mausoleum knights is the following. The eclipse sun, green in colour, is the protective star of the soulless demigods. It aids the mausoleum knights by keeping death and death at bay. The eclipse is also the symbol associated with the soulless, and it is seen as a ward that will keep death and death at bay. Obviously something to avoid for these soulless demigods, so they don't die permanently before they are restored. A really great video on the subject of the eclipse is one by Hilo, and I highly recommend you check that out, and I will link today. The protective nature of the eclipse as a type of ward is also explained by a field on the shield of the defender. The eclipse also thematically neatly sets in. Not only is the eclipse extremely similar to two sides of the Halobrand, but again, there are some cultural connotations to the eclipse which are relevant to death, and we will shortly deal with those. But I want to first ask, what is the point of Castle Sol? What are they actually trying to achieve here? Well, let us try and cover the purpose behind these people, the people who existed in Castle Sol, those who seem to venerate the eclipse. We have already looked at one closed dialogue, which implies the eclipse to restore the soulless demigods, and so now let us turn to the other closed dialogue found in the castle, one in the main chapel, who echoes the veneration of the eclipse. O great sun, frigid sun of Sol, surrender yourself to the eclipse, grant light to the soulless bones. So the connecting factor here seems to be the belief that the eclipse, swallowing the sun, can restore the soulless demigods to full life. Yet what is the basis for this theory? Fortunately, I am friends with you who are far more familiar with Japanese cultural implications as well as the language itself. Of course, people familiar with the channel will know I'm referring to last time. We have once again provided some excellent information in regards to the eclipse. In a comment on Eula's video regarding the eclipse, last protagonist said the following, and he's given me permission to share this comment. The term for eclipse comes from shoku, which is the same kanji for washibami, which means wormington, corroded, imperial, etc. This comes up a lot in dark to describe the way curses at the dark the way to use it. Like in Law, Dark Law, Volmir's Blue Sword, etc. In Elden Ring, the term also comes up with items associated with bonding, weather daggers, the corruption of fortresses, etc. This all ties into the eclipse of Shoto, which is described as a sun in the range of colour. It might imply that there is or was a connection between the sun and the grace of gold, and might coincide with the sun being killed, or how warming stone say the earth was as warm and changeable as the sun. So again, brilliant insight from Black Tigers and the YouTube channel. Please check out their channel as they offer them out with Japanese and cultural connotations. Again, thanks to Black Tigers. Now the part I want to focus in on is how Last Protagonist
Wrong button.
Centuries of worm eating descriptions ties into the eclipse photo, which is described as the sun being drained of colour and worms of colour. I find this interesting because it's in line with the idea of the sun being eaten. Like the ghost at Castle Sol mentions the eclipse
Ghost.
swallowing the sun. Is it then possible that the cultists of Sol are bent on the eclipse to swallow the sun, to steal its vitality, to restore the soulless demigod? I do believe that this is their belief. That they wish the eclipse to eat the vitality of the sun.
Dicen, ahora va a dar,
The demigod. At least that's their belief, even if there isn't any way to do it. Specifically, it appears that the Pacifist Sol is a joint venture between the group of Sol and Controller. Yet we go dialogue between you at the beginning of the chapter. And this is unsurprising, given Nicholas' great empathy for the outcast and forgotten, as well as his implied sympathy for his half-brother, as suggested by the quote's epitaph. And I now want to make an editorial note here. I had far more planned in this chapter, the soulless demigod, the necromancy. But as with my last video, the video's already become far too long, so I have decided to cut certain elements of the story. However, don't worry, I am already planning the next video that will be cut into pieces. I'm going to do a combined video on death, including the death birds, necromancy, the soulless demigods, and the half of the order. So, something to look forward to, more time talking about it. With that said, I want to turn to an important figure who champions Godric's cause in an attempt to stand up for those without a voice. I am of course referring to Thea and the conclusion of Godric's story. Thea is a fascinating character whose story is presented to us right at the beginning of the game, during the introductory cinematic, when we quickly learn that Thea is a deathbed companion and also a target. When trying to understand what a deathbed companion is, a good place to start is probably from Thea herself, who says the following. Sophia pretty much gives us the bare bones of what her position entails. They absorb the vitality of champions they embrace, such as us, and they use that for others to breathe new life into those who are already past. In this dialogue, Thea also seems to describe exactly what is depicted on her introductory slide art. She was lying with a noble to bear him into new life. I find the term bear him into new life interesting. It has connotations of childbirth, and as you'll see later in this video and in her quest, she does seem to birth new life from the observed vitality of other champions. It isn't just a transference of energy, it is almost a recycling or reincarnation of the original vitality taken from the embraced champion. There is actually a lot of surrounding warmth that can help explain the deathbed companion. For example, we get an allegorical description of their origins as a profession by the perfumer Tricia Atkins, which reads the following. Tricia was once known as a healer who dedicated her efforts to treating misbegotten, omen, and all those seen as inferior. When her efforts failed, she was a companion as they died, watching over them to ensure that they could pass on peacefully, free of pain. A tale akin to the origins of the deathbed companion. So by using Tristler's story as a comparison, the description of the deathbed companions was once that, an order of people who indeed deathbed companions, companions to people on their deathbed, to watch over and help them pass peacefully. After a time it clearly evolved to where it was more about restoring people from their deathbed. And I do find it interesting to consider the origins of the deathbed companions, mainly because the only one we meet is out of their context. But we can glean a little on that context. Firstly, let us look at the Baldur's blessing. It seems to show a temple covered in curtains or canopy-like fixtures. And the description of this item describes these as being temples in the guise of bedchambers. And obviously with beds, deathbeds being an important part of this order, this makes sense. This also matches up with the term baldachin, where a baldachin, according to Merriam-Webster, is a cloth-covered canopy fixed or carried over an important person or sacred object. This matches the canopy we see on the temple showing of the baldachin blessing, and the very cloak that Thea wears over her deathbed dress in travel. These black robes look very much like canopies or canopies. Most likely then, the term baldachin blessing most likely means a blessing from these baldachin covered temples. I could be wrong, and baldachin could be the name from where Thea is from, or the name of a god associated with these temples. But either way, it does tie in to what we see as the kind of aesthetic overlay of this culture. However, the darkest part of this role is the fact that deathbed companions never choose who they lie with. This is directly told to us by Freya herself, who says the following when she chooses to lie with God.
I am satisfied. I choose to love.
Therefore, Freya and her kind are directed to lie with the remains chosen for them. And given Freya tells us that it was a noble she was last told to lie with, I would assume the implication is that the upper classes benefit from this particular brand of resurrection. And the radiant of blessing also suggests that the deathbed companions will choose to be embraced to get the vigor to resurrect the noble. As it was
Deodoro.
it is said that deathbed companions will only produce a blessing of this kind for a chapter, but once in her entire life. The sole blessing which she imbues of her own volition, meaning that any other religion blessing that is
Yeah,
bestowed by a
it's
dead
all
companion is not of their own volition. It is just a part of their choice.
Oh
This lack
my
of choice
God.
is quite key in Thea's realization. When
Unbelievable.
Thea becomes tired
Barry.
and is exiled from this land which she hails, she chooses a new path and chooses to use her skills and
No.
powers for another purpose, her own purpose. She says the following.
Tell me.
Thea chooses to defend those who, through no fault of their own, are hunted, persecuted, and have no voice, have no choice. Given Thea's life of being told what to do as a deathbed companion and being chased from her homeland, and now being bound by grace to no choice of her own, we can easily see why she would have great sympathy and empathy for these people. I feel her ideals must be similar to her allies, Roger's, who quite rightly states that their existence, those who are the dead, is no fault of their own. Sophia picks it upon herself to try and right this wrong, and finally make some choices for herself. And the first way she does this is via her embracing. Not only is she using this energy in a build-up which gets taken on the island, but she also uses it in a more defensively. Rhea appears to take the portion of vitality of champions that she lives, and some of them as champions to defend against the dead, and the practice of carrying puppetry. This makes sense. We say Rogier and Lionel in the fight against the two champions. For Paris, we know she has brave, as she mentions Rogier in that context, and we later find them alongside Lionel in a bed with Bell. To be clear, these are puppets. These blue manifestations are the same color as the carrion puppets. They are not the actual champions themselves being summoned like the blue phantom, rather an imprint of them, especially since Rogier will be dead by this stage when he takes them as a fair champion. This is actually a rather impressive feat, and it really emphasizes how much power Thea gains when absorbing the power of champions. And it will play a key role in her gestation of the Mending Room. And yet, to make this Mending Room, she needed the two sides of what brought the curse of unlike the land of the two sides of the hourglass. And so she sets ourselves and Lord Gale in motion to retrieve it, though she makes great efforts to hide her true motivations, only portraying herself as someone who is interested in watching Lord Gale, a friend, while mysteriously acting as the principal path that she got from a friend from a friend from a friend. Meanwhile, Rogier also seems to let the secret slip from her. Thea has already mentioned how Rogier says things while in bed, and he appears to hold another secret that reveals much information to Thea. It is the same secret he divulged to us from the form of a note after his death, written in a trembling hand. It says the following: I forgot to tell you, but it seems to me has a younger brother. I heard he lies in a deep sleep in the aqueduct beside his friend, and it is dead. He sleeps before the place of death, not far beyond that spot. Now with this note, everything that transpired between Thea and Bee makes complete sense. Thea knew that Bee's brother had stood before the Prince of Death. This no doubt explains why we find the twin puzzles and Rome, not far from where Godwin lies. And now with that in mind, let us look at the weather Dagger and Thea act like everything follows. Dagger is from Thea to get to the mind. But he returns to the spring. It was once a special gift when food and silver in front. It is now worn down and marred by a black gash. His name, marred by a black gash, was down. Evidently a weapon called his one's brother. And surely given his goodness of war, and assumed that this blade was turned against Godwin, given the black gash on the blade. But from what end? Well, the answer, I believe, comes from Thea herself when we reach her in her death. She says the following. Godwin's Halobrand has since recovered that record of the day, meaning it wasn't on Godwin's person, meaning someone had it at Rainbow Home, and thus, to me anyway, it explains why Thea actually kills Steve. It isn't because he is a golden order hunter. No, he has Godwin's Halobrand, and she takes it from his cold, dead hand. This is my speculation again, but why see the events of the world examine this? These brothers stood before Godwin and carved out his halogram from Godwin's very flesh, the act of Mars's blade, and dragged him to slumber. And given his state, the brand will come to be possessed by he, his twin brother, for safety. Thea learns of this via Rogier, the secret he would fit to us later, and knowing she will come into conflict with the carnage. She develops Thea's myth, an incantation only effective against the untracked carnage. For all his martial strength, he is no match to the Deathblade. Thea lures him into a trap by passing the drink, but all but says, I know, and revealing her true loyalty. Thea then kills him with the Deathblade, reclaims the Halobrand, and disappears into the rain to be by God's side. It's actually a brilliant bit of storytelling, a masterclass that happens in front of our very eyes, but it's neither Thea nor he. Every change to the turn the other half of the Halobrand Thea, which of course was the intended result of stoking Rogier's interest in finding the other half of the Halobrand. Then the endgame of her plan becomes her death. She can bind these two together to raise your station directly. She says the following.
Big boy. Huh?
And so it seems as though Thea's position as a deathbed companion is absolutely key in the formation of this group. Long as she channels the power of champions, vitality, to resurrect the dead, As I noted earlier, this process through semantics is indicated to be in childbirth. And now again, she refers to this as her child, this room, not a child in the traditional sense, but a recycling of life that is akin to the natural process of giving birth to the real world. And not only is this a child of God given Thea, but Thea also implies that it refers to our child, for she is using the word from our vicar from our last phrase, the breathe life to gestate this new child. Of course, unfortunately, this is where he must face until one of the truest heroes of Elder's reign, Fortisac. Fortisac has spent unknowable years within Godwin's mind, fighting and resisting the death of his friend. And yet that now means he is an obstacle to the birth of the Nature's brain. This memory room is dead, and Fortisac's influence in that death is no doubt being used also the birth of the dead brain. And so it is with great sorrow that we must put the life to peace down, so God and his child may come forth. So what does this memory room represent for the future for those who live in death and for the world at large? Well, let us first of all read the description of the room itself and try to understand. It reads the following: formed of the pure Halloween afterwards, it was then of life of death, was it golden order was created by confining death to death. Thus, this new order
Whoa.
death
I'm good. No wonder.
So first of all, it makes it clear that it is both sides of the Halloween. This is not the original death. And given it's both sides of the Halloween, you may assume that it restores original death to death, and makes death normal again, given that both aspects of both sides of death. However, I think it's clear this isn't the case, as the room specifically mentions that life is death, rooms of living death, are brought into order. They will not be removed or reversed or made through death. They are being brought in through the order. This is also backed up in the fact that Thea states, this implies that Godwin will continue to be the source of those who live in death.
So,
A new kind of position of power within the new order as first of the dead. This literally seems to just be bringing everything that's outside the order in regards to the death, with Godwin into the very actual changes that happen. Now, the mending room does suggest that death will be restored, maybe implying that normal death will be restored. But bear in mind, this isn't the original room of death. And so if we consider this science, the word of rooms, this isn't the room of death. This is the room of the death type, meaning that the Prince of Death, as he is still going to exist in this order. It's his order that is being incorporated into the order. This is the age of the dust. And given dust in any connection to death, you could literally translate this to the age of the death order. And while this sounds utterly repellent, consider this might just be the right thing to do. Those who live in death did not choose to be what they are, and it was the current order that led to them to act all through their pure choices. Perhaps in your era of life and death, death chosen by God, will have a new, just era of life. So thanks guys, my take on Godwin, Prince of Death, a fascinating subject, a pretty deep one, and a lot of fun doing this video. As I said, there's going to be some other parts of this video that I took out that I think will fit accurately in your own videos. So keep an eye out for that. And as many people have requested, I am also doing the video on the stuff that I took out from American videos, which is one great stuff. I think it's really interesting to catch up, and I think you'll really enjoy it. If you like this video, please give it a like and subscribe to the channel, as I've been plenty of Elden Ring more. If you want to support the channel other ways, I do Patreon, and I do membership. Apart from that, guys, let me know in the comments below what you think about this presenting what you think about it. But until next time, I will see you in future days. Take care, and have a lovely day. shattering war left the land between broken, and led to the greater well abandoning the demigods, as none among their number had truly risen to become Lord. The war concluded with the two greatest among their number incapacitating one another in the climactic battle of Aeolia. With the Golden Order failed
Vai
and
levando,
no
tem com
obvious
pai, cara.
successor, grace could be extended elsewhere in an attempt to forge a new Lord. Beyond the borders of the lands between were the Tarnished, a warrior people of an age long past, driven from the lands between and divested of their grace. One man stands far taller among the Tarnished, a man of legendary status, Morlun, chieftain of the Badlands, once known as Godfrey, first Elder Lord. Godfrey is the pinnacle of what it means to be tarnished, a mighty warrior, raised to incredible heights, only to be stripped of everything and banished, being tempted in death before finally being called back at the land between's darkest hour. Godfrey and his tarnished have a critical role in the story of Elden Ring, and in many ways, Godfrey is one of the most influential and legendary figures in Erdtree's society. In understanding him and his tarnished kinfolk, you get a greater understanding of the story at large. So join me this week as we unpack the story of the first Elder Lord and ourselves, the Tarnished People. And before we get started, guys, remember that if you like Elden Ring lore, then consider subscribing to the channel and liking the video. Before we talk about the lore of the piece, I want to talk about a piece of a deal by introducing today's sponsor. Today's video is brought to you by Display, who have just introduced an official Elden Ring collection, meaning I am now able to decorate my office space with one-of-a-kind metal posters. These official Elden Ring designs really take it to the next level. The detail and quality is so impressive, bright and vibrant, and they are easy to mount with their magnetic system. As a God-skin fan, I am delighted to have this console watching over me. But my favourite is actually the map of the land between, as I have been waiting to make a copy of the map on my wall for a while now, so no excuse getting lost now. Display has collections from many famous brands and individual artists, like Mariska Becker, who does great sci-fi pieces, or Dominic Mayer, who does incredibly fancy ones. Display has always actually been part of my decor, with this alien poster resting above my desk. Display has a great alien collection, as well as other brands like Diablo, that will let you celebrate the return of Lilith style. So if you're not interested, please consider using my link in the description below, which will give you up to 23% off your order and help the channel out. Thanks again to Display, and now back to the lore. To understand the Tarnished, you need to understand Godfrey, for he is the one who eventually moved the Tarnished out of the land of peace, and it is from them that they can find themselves. I like the story of our player, the Tarnished, has a rich history, and we get a rare sort of picture with a godly character
Vai, irmão.
that we rarely get in other From Software games. But not only is Godfrey important for the Tarnished, but in some ways he is one of the most important figures in Erdtree mythology, treated with a reverence and respect far above other characters like Radigan, for example. And there is good reason for this, as in some ways he is the founding and uniting figure of the Erdtree era, alongside Martha, of course. He is garnered this respect because he is the one who won all the victories for the Erdtree in his early period, uniting the lands under his bow. So let's talk about the earliest era of Mormon's history so we can understand the age that tested the man who would become first Elder Lord. The remembrance of Moraloo reads the following. After the long march of the Tarnished came to an end, Godfrey divested himself of kingship, becoming a simple warrior once more. Now, while this refers to the long march of the Tarnished, event nearing the end of Godfrey's timeline, it is the term becoming a simple warrior once more, which tells us that not only was Moraloo a persona after he became Tarnished, but also that he was Moraloo before he became Godfrey, Elder Lord. Moraloo, as our fight with this persona is a vastly different person than the stable Godfrey. This was for part communicated by Borley's behaviour and mentality of strength warrants a crown, i.e. might makes right, a classic trope display a more barbarian culture. Godfrey is a symbol of the era of civilization, order, and of Godfrey's control orderly manner. Even Godfrey's name means godly or heavenly peace, a real indicator of what Godfrey represents. In stark opposition to the Godfrey personality is his original personage, Borloo, warrior, whose nature we of course get a hint of via the Godfrey icon description, which reads as follows. Godfrey was a ferocious warrior. When he vowed to become a lord, he took the beast regent upon his back to suppress the ceaseless lust for battle that raged within. Meaning, of course, that before Godfrey was Godfrey, and before he takes Rosh on his back, Borloo was possessed of unceasing bloodlust, a warrior of unmatched range, power, and with a distinct lack of restraint. And this very much is the man that we see in the second stage of Godfrey's fight, when he has ripped Sarosh off his back, and he fights with his bare hands. We get further evidence of what this barbarian warlord stood for by the champion headband, which describes Badland culture, a tribe he established after becoming Borloo once more after his tarnishing, but could definitely be used to analyse the Borloo of yesteryear. The item reads as follows. Headband reserved for the Badlands bravest, proof that the wearer has slaughtered countless foes. Following the example of their chieftain Borloo, the brave warriors of the Badlands shunned excess adornment, strength and warrior austerity, where strength is valued above all else, and excess adornment and showmanship is not part of the culture. This strongest survives and the strongest rules is almost animal kingdom in its construction. This all grounds Borloo in the era that he is most associated with, that of the Crucible, a period of war, bestial vitality, and competition, a far cry from the civilized Erdtree and Golden Order eras. We know that the age of the Crucible is one of vitality and primordial life, thanks to the many descriptions of it. For example, the scale, feather, and knot talismans read the following. A vestige of the crucible of primordial life, born partially of evolution. It was once considered a signifier of the divine in ancient times, but is now increasingly disdained as an impurity as civilization has advanced. So where the Golden Order and Erdtree eras represent civilization, the Crucible era stands for the opposite. These items also tie the Crucible to the Misbegotten and the Omen, given that the Knot Talisman is brought by any killer and visually represents the knotted forms that cover their bodies, and the Scale and Feather Talismans can be used to describe the Misbegotten, where both scale and have vestigial wings. Both the Misbegotten and Omen are examples of overflowing, almost cancerous life, both beings having wild vestigial growth that aren't the result of careful evolutionary design. Rather, they are examples of uncontrollable and chaotic life. This is further emphasized by the description of the aspects of the crucible incantations. The descriptions of all of these describe the crucible as a power where all life was blended together. Again, an era of excessive, chaotic life, the stark opposite of controlled civilization. This chaos extends to the artistic representations of the crucible itself, seen in Siluria's spear and Siluria's helm, and in what tarnished archaeologist terms the gardener statues. Finally, the term crucible itself not only signifies that the crucible itself was a vessel that contained blended together life, as is suggested by the description of the aspects of the crucible incantations, but the term crucible can also mean an era of the survival of the fittest. Now, we don't know precisely what the era prior to the Crucible era was called, but we know from Placidius' remembrance that he ruled as Elden Lord in the age before the Erd Tree. So in this age before the Erd Tree, possibly an age that intersected with that of the Crucible, Placidusax had been Elden Lord, and he was consort to a now fled god. The dragon civilization is one built by dragons, hawks, and beastmen. And so while it is impossible to know if the dragon civilization was in full swing just before or during the age of the Crucible, we do have evidence that Horaloo, or Godfrey, interacted with beasts of this civilization, or at least we have good evidence to suggest it. And so whether Horaloo operated just in the age of the Crucible or this
I don't do it. Good.
it is clear that he was immersed in an era that valued strength over everything else, an era of violence, light, energy, chaos, and peace. And in many ways, this is encapsulated and cultivated by a simplicity of iconography that would come to be part of Godfrey's library, the Lying Ramsey. The beast, more specifically, the Lying Ramsey, is of course part of Godfrey's art. And we still see it upon the British army of Godwin, which is descended. We see the line ranking at Stormstone, and of course at the Fortified Manor, as well as at the line acting on the grave, stone, and line manor. All those things are associated with Godwin's early world. And in order to understand Godwin's early world, we have to try and understand the beast to inspire this everything. We know the identity of this beast thanks to the tree and its circle, which is worn by Godric on it reaches forward. The circle depicts the distant earth and the beast region, an emblem of the golden lineage, or a symbol of glory and path. The beast region is also known as God. In fact, the pantheon by the Godric pantheon, which we have already read, but it's already referenced as strong. We can now know him as being outward with the message of the Bible that is God. However, once Saron was a more distant friend, something we learn of prior to being called grace, which means the black veil, the trimming of golden fur, are said to represent Saron, or the the way cause to become tangled in the future. This is in fact before, because it suggests that Soros was once the lord of the old people, the beast. We know from Godfrey's declaration of strength and the crown, as well as his list of victories in his armour set, that Godfrey was a great conqueror, who rose from the age of violence as a victor over many clans and rulers. It would make sense that Soros's transition from Lord to Godfrey's region was also the result of Godfrey defeating Soros and his beast civilization, and binding him to his will. So now I'd like to take the time to analyse Soros and his beast people, for I think it is vital in understanding the early days of Horaloo and who he would become, and because understanding one of Godfrey's oldest advisors helps inform us of where Horaloo came from. The beast civilization is an interesting and unique challenge to analyse, and I think it is something I will look at in more depth in a separate video. But when it comes to a timeline, there is plenty of evidence that points to the fact that Fire Missoula, the beast and dragon civilization, developed over a long period of time and was quite ancient. This is a subject we have assessed in our Timeline and Dragons video, where, thanks to the excellent work of tarnished archaeologists, we can compare the development of human prehistory to the development of beastmen society, showing how old this civilization is. Firstly, we have reference to the beastmen beginning to use stone tools, and thus parallel to real-life stories. And this is something we learn of by slightly intention, which means that it says that in the time before the earth stones were the first weapons of the beast. So not only is this the first
Not bad.
but it makes it clear that this beast civilization took place in the time before the Earth Tree, clearly setting it before the more modern Flame civilization and the Earth Tree faith. We can backtrack in prehistory development further from the Stone Age through to the Copper Age, thanks to tarnished archaeologists' identification of the Beastmen burials being a reference to the Copper Age Varna burials. And then finally into the Iron Age, thanks to the description of the Beastman cleaver that makes it clear that these weapons are of iron construction. And so while I have often assumed that all of this history took place a long time ago, and evidently some of it dead, like the Stone Age and the Copper Age parts of Beastman society, I am now of the opinion that the Beastman civilization may well have been more around when Godfrey or Boraloo was rising strongly, such as the similarity with Godfrey's axe and the Beastman cleaver, as well as the semantics of the Saxon's remembrance that suggests that he was still the Elven Lord in the age just prior to that of the Earth, and we will go over some other connections. But people may be wondering why we've been talking about Beastman society, and that's of course because we are talking about Soros, Lord of Beasts, and we can find the lines visited throughout Fire Missoula and the Bestial Sanctum, which to me heavily suggests that lions like Soros were very much part of this Beastman and dragon civilization.
Oh, fuck.
It is clear that the Beastman civilization was subservient to the dragons, as we can see by the clear statuary in Fire Missoula that shows Beastmen being sort of religious or clerical attendants to the dragons. It is likely that the Beastmen existed under the aegis of the Sidusats, who was their elven lord in this age before the Erdtree, their ruler essentially. The Sidusats' remembrance mentions a god, and Fire Missoula has an engraving of a differently configured elven ring. So basically, we have all the components of an order: a god, the one mentioned in the Sidusats' remembrance, an elven lord, the Sidusats himself, and the elven ring, much like we had Godfrey, Martha, and the elven ring later. In totality, I would speculate that this society would be made up of beastmen, wolves, lions like Soros and the guardian lions, dragons, and hawks, all of which can be tied back to Fire Missoula, either by statue or by mythical presence. I would also argue that humans played a role in this society
Unbelievable.
due to the statues of humans we find around Fire Missoula, as well as the lore of the draconian appearance precept or Arthurs, which talks about a race of humans that were all the ancient dragons, and the banished knights who I believe started off as warriors that served the dragons and the Sidusats. But we will revisit that soon. So we could just write this subject off as a very ancient civilization distinct from the modern culture of the Erdtree, and that Godfrey, Boraloo, had some kind of clash with him in the past that resulted in Soros's submission. However, there is more to Soros that we could potentially mine. As I've already said, there is lion iconography throughout Fire Missoula and the Bestial Sanctum, and to me this suggests some sort of importance to Soros, which makes sense if he was the Lord of Beasts. Soros's importance to bestial society could be tied to their idea of intelligence. We have already looked at the icon description of bestial slang, which speaks of the beastmen first gaining intelligence, evolving from feral beasts to a society that begins to use tools. And of course, using tools is often seen as the first step for an intelligent society. The advent of their intelligence is further expanded upon by the Chinkodea, which reads the following: short sword, given to high-ranking clergymen of Fire Missoula. The design celebrates a beast's 5 fingers, symbolic of their intelligence once granted upon their time. The 5 fingers is symbolic of their intelligence. In my mind, no doubt a reference to opposable thumbs, a hand setup that has allowed humans and our primate cousins to utilize tools, which, as we've said, is often the first signs of intelligence. Now, this is important because there's another reference to 5 fingers, and it is from something we've already looked at, the Beast Claw Great Hammer, which I will read again. Great hammer with a striking end, modelled to resemble 5 beastly claws. The black nails protruding from the golden fur are said to represent Soros, Lord of Beasts. So does this mean that the 5 claws that represent Soros also represent intelligence? as if he is tied to their idea of intelligence. Was he one of the first beings to gain intelligence? Or the first? Or is it that he is considered the wisest and most intelligent among them? The Roman Crescio describes Sarosh as an aged counselor who guides the golden lineage. To me, this gives a picture of an old and wise being. So at the very least, I would speculate that Sarosh is a wise and respected elder of Beastman society who would go on to give sage advice to Godfrey. As in every depiction that we get of Sarosh, the main thing that is mentioned is his intelligence and advice, not his beastly power or martial prowess. It's always focused in on his intelligence, where his presence in turn makes Horlu less of a beast and more like a lord. He really is the aspect of Godfrey that something unworldly. Ultimately, what is clear to me is that Sarosh was one of the important characters in this part of society, a lord among the people if they were subservient to the dragon ultimately. He does so there in pride, which is either representative of the position as a regent of Godfrey, or he will allowed to retain his crown as a lord of the beasts, but subservient to Godfrey ultimately. And my reason for supposing that Horlu or Godfrey defeated Sarosh and made him his regent is because, of course, they were both lords in their own way, and they were both beasts in their own way. We can hardly see Sarosh
One creatures.
kneeling before Godfrey within the fight. And indeed, we do see scars on Sarosh's face, suggesting he was injured in his fight long ago. It would be simple enough to leave it there that Sarosh was a lord among beasts, and Horlu defeated him in one of his many conquests, and evidently Godfrey did respect Sarosh because he didn't just defeat him to kill him, he also became an important part to Godfrey's identity. However, there are more considerations when you speak of the culture of the beast and Horlu's early history, and that is the rather interesting connections between Stormvale, the fortified manor, and Fire Missoula. One of the most interesting connections is, of course, the Banished Knights, which are not only present in Fire Missoula and Stormvale, but also Stormvale and the fortified manor hold the armaments and weapons of the Banished Knights. So what is the connection here? These knights clearly have a connection to the dragon's civilization, for not only are they present in Fire Missoula, but they also use dragon communion incantation and bear the dragon upon their helm. In Warhunter's Stormvale lore video, Warhunter makes the suggestion that Stormvale was originally a fortification built by a Stormlord that was then captured by Godfrey, co-opted, and altered over time by Godfrey and his descendants. And in last protagonist's lore video, they suggest that the Banished Knights then once the Stormlord was recently dead too soon, but after the defeat of the Stormlord, these Banished Knights would be trained into Godfrey's service. And I believe the truth is a measure of these two ideas, but I will not focus on the below if you want their explanations of their theory. So let's start with the Banished Knights. In last protagonist's video on the Stormlord, they make a lot of interesting observations regarding the Banished Knights. Firstly, they point out that in the original Japanese, the description for Banished Knight and the Banished Poland are a little bit more to the point. In English, they say, one of the two knights known as the Winds of the Storm. Yet, according to the last protagonist translation, they are referred to in the Japanese as the Winds of the Storm Lord, cementing the connection of the Banished Knights once had to the Storm Lord that is mentioned in Godfrey's armour. As I will discuss in the next chapter, I do believe that the Stormlord was most likely Pacifist, but later Godfrey would bind these warriors to his will after defeating their lord, Pacifist. Thus, these Banished Knights, with their dragon-top helm and association with Fire Missoula, is it possible that these Banished Knights are formed from the Draconian humans, a race of humans available as an appearance preset in Character Creator. The description of this preset reads as follows: the stony face of the people of the ancient dragons, among whom life is typically short. Of course, this very much hints to a race of people who lived alongside and served the ancient dragons, and it would explain the many humanoid statues and reliefs that we see in Fire Mozilla. And of course, this is just speculation, but I've just tried to zoom in on the faces beneath the Banished Knights, and it does look like the skin tone of the Draconian human preset, though I'm sure someone more skilled than I could fully unmask these NPCs and find out the truth for sure. Leave your comments below if you think this is the Draconian preset underneath the Banished Knights article. Dragon depiction on the plate and found in Stonewall could be further evidence of Stormfield's proud ancient heritage. Regardless, that is a lot of speculation, but we have explained rather hodgepodge imagery in Stormfield and on the Banished Knights. But of course, Stormfield and the Banished Knights are also associated with Hawk, and the Stormhawk King would be well involved in this war before God would conquer. For example, the importance of the Hawk to Stormfield and its ancient heritage is made clear by its Hawk crest shield, which reads the following. The guard of the long crest of Stormfield is ancient in design, and of course that icon is the Hawk. In fact, it's more or less stated that the Stormhawk King, the layer of the Hawk, once rode over this bridge at Stormfield over other Hawks, and its ancient description reads the following. Ashes of the Hawk were reared by all others as sovereign, back in the days when Stormfield went, still reigns with the other. This ancient monarch is proud, however, refusing to answer anyone's son. This would of course explain the turning of Hawk to Stormfield, and how the Banished Knights utilize the power of the storm, as well as the Hawk as another food for the castle. It makes it clear the Hawks are important to the history of this location. I would speculate that after God defeated the Stormhawk King, that he would be this region one of his masters, and even eventually the surviving Hawk in this area. And the Warhawk ashes, the ash of the type of Hawks we see around Stormfield, and the graphic clause, says the following. The spirit of the Stormfield Warhawk, the talons of which have been sliced off, so the razor-like sword can be grafted in their place. With its more vanquished and its wedded looting, the Hawk perish and the solemn views that its will must hold. And this tells a lot about the Hawk that are at Stormfield. It suggests to me that the Hawks, so broken by the loss of their king, the Stormhawk monarch, submitted to Godfrey and his men, having blades forcibly grafted onto them, and serving Stormville as guard dogs almost. Indeed, their enslavement is more or less confirmed by the fact that their wings have been wounded and we see chains upon their backs. A stark contrast to the free and natural hawks found in Fire Mozilla. And so, given there are hawks and Banished Knights here, as there are in Fire Mozilla, I would suggest that Stormvale was just an extension of Fire Mozilla's society, and that the Stormhawk monarchs ruled over hawks in this location as a part of the greater Fire Mozilla civilization. But much like his other defeated enemy, Sauron, hawks would continue to be an important symbol for Godfrey for a long time, showing how much he respected their power. For not only does the hawk symbol feature heavily in Stormfield, Fortified Manor, and Castle Morn, but dialogue with the Fairy Blue shows that Godfrey's later Badlands clan, far into the future after the conquest of Stormfield, would continue having a relationship with hawks. But when we give the Stormhawk monarch to Nefeli Blue, she talks about having a hawk in her homeland, and she says,
Is that ash? I can smell the ancient storm. This ash, it reminds me of my first hawk.
This connection with the Badlands clan is further reinforced by Nefeli Blue's weapon of choice, the Stormhawk axe, which of course recalls the power of the Hawks of Stormvale, but this could be because the Badlands are actually like Stormvale, and as we discuss later in this video, this could be why her really chose the Badlands to Zeppelin, because the Fairy Moon says the following when she becomes the Lord of Stormvale.
This land is much like the one from which I hail. I will call on the storm to drive away the fires that has settled on the lands.
But we are getting slightly ahead of ourselves here. And we will talk about exactly what the Storm Lord, so we talk about Godfrey's written, but I just wanted to make it clear my ideas behind the connections of Stormvale with Fire Missoula. Ultimately, I see it as a bit of a melting point and a crossover of Horley's ideas of a warrior, as well as a previous civilization,
Venga, poco
a
grande que.
civilization of beasts, hawks, and dragons, all which would be incorporated by the rising Horaloo, the banished knights serving under him, the hawks brought to heel, and Solange becoming one of his most trusted advisors and part of his iconography. If I was to cut down on whether I think Godfrey built Stormvale Castle from scratch, or whether it was something he later took and built upon, I would go with the latter. But I would say that Godfrey certainly had a hand, and his later descendants, in developing it to the state that we see it in today. There are too many ties to the Hawks to discount them completely as having an influence on this place. But of course there are signs of Godfrey's influence. For example, what I call the Crucible Church, the area that we passed through after the rampart site of Grace. This must have been built in Godfrey's time, as it has crucible iconography. For example, there is the turquoise statue on the roof of a lady with an amphora, very similar to the depiction of Martha with the amphora found on the Erdtree favourite talisman, a talisman which describes the early era of the Erdtree. And inside, there are two variations of the Gardener statue, which we believe represent the crucible. And to me, it is also implied that Godfrey's descendant, also had a hand in further expanding the castle, namely with the golden ornamentation grafted on top. Godfrey seems like a more austere warrior, whereas Godfrey seems like someone who wants to show off his golden lineage, and thus it would make sense for Godric to be the one who further grafted on the gold onto Stormvale. Stormvale is definitely a layered illustration and history of Stormvale and Lundgrave itself, and if you'd like to learn more about its design and potential architectural layers, then I would highly recommend Lore Hunter's excellent video on that very subject. But for me, the best illustration of Stormvale's heritage is the concluding part of Nephelia's quest. Nephelia's ascension to the throne as the Lady of Stormvale only happens after she accepts the ashes of the Stormhawk King, very symbolic of Stormvale itself. Laying the blood of Godfrey and in possession of the ash of the old Stormhawk monarch, first Nepheli is victim. She needs to move to the Stormvale as Lady Nephelia. This large action is served to explain Godfrey of Horaloo's early interaction with the age and civilization of beasts, hawks, beastmen, and dragons. And again, in case the timing a little bit more blurry, the priest essentially starts the age of dragons taking more than the beginning of the age of the Crucible. And Horaloo, this is a man of the zero. Horaloo, the man of the age of beasts, and Godfrey, first elven lord of the time of the Erdtree, but also someone who very much respected those who keep the world, and his most trusted advisor as a lord of the era. This mission of the Lord may well be symbolically represented by Godfrey's act itself, an excellent observation made by scholars of theology by a literature Ernad Jan. He dedicated pointing design similarities between Godfrey's act and the picture in regards to the design of the both. If this is true, then Godfrey's act again then it becomes even more symbolic than it already is. I know construct that previous civilization gifted to the Lord to carry us forth into a new age. And so with that said, the Lord of Peace and peaceful civilization covered, let us now comprehend Godfrey's early culture and his eventual ascension to Elven Lord. Starting from Godfrey, the video, likely to have an Arthur, the legendary mythological unifying British king. As I say, all these legendary parallels, there are even more things to be here, but with that initial mind, let us look at the legendary itself. The fortified manner is of course the original physical installation of the vegetable world that we as the tarnished now require to constitute our lordship. And this is a disincentive for the gathering of the tarnished, as there is a good chance that the ancestors of the tarnished most likely made up the warriors that once stood around the round table in fortified manner with Godfrey in the years past. We of course know that the fortified manner was associated with Godfrey thanks to the lying rampant banners and the lying rampant that sits above the door itself. And in general, it is very similarly isolated to Stormfield. And in general, the concept of a round table very much lines up with the view of Godfrey or Philip, a man who uses strength and martial prowess, and having a couple of warriors that were also so peaceful in terms of their voice, was very different for his earlier days. This concept is from Arthurian legend, where Arthur's council was made up of the trusted and legendary knights. When they stood at that table, there was no head on the table. No voice was valued more than the other, despite the fact that the king was unknown. And by proving their valor in battle, you earned the right to be fully and equal as a member of the round table. Godfrey's early focus on warrior culture was of course reflected in the design of fortified manor itself. It stands in stark contrast to the opulent design of higher Vale that surrounds it. The fortified manor is very smartly designed, merely a functional defensive outpost. The idea that tarnished archaeologists take in their concrete review that this manor definitely precedes highly Vale culture. Inside the manor is a very functional space
Very.
with rooms dedicated to storage, blacksmithing, armour, and a council chamber, as well as a kitchen and eating spaces. You can very much imagine this as a true warrior's home. It's not just for show, and that it could actually withstand a siege if necessary. We have already discussed the history of Sarosh, but what is interesting to me is that when we consider the later livery of the golden lineage represented by Godric's men, the livery is balanced between what is now considered to be the two symbols of Godfrey's rule, the Lion of Sarosh and the Erd Tree. The very fact both Stormvale and the fortified manor only have the lion banner implies to me that the Sarosh symbol was the earlier part of Godfrey's symbolism before he became the Elven Lord of the Erd Tree Order, as well as the fact that these constructions are specifically Godfrey's holdings rather than a greater part of the Waynvale and Erd Tree Order. Again, the prevalence of banished knight armour in both Stormvale and the fortified manor, two locations connected to Godfrey, again makes that connection that the banished knights were eventually pressed into service under Godfrey, whether you believe them to originally be warriors of the Storm Lord or not. And to me, when we look at the early history of Fortified Manor and Godfrey, we're not only looking at the heritage of Hoaraloo, but of the Tarnished themselves, of our own character. As we will get into later, the Tarnished are the warrior people who stood alongside Godfrey. And we know this from Marika's speech, where she divests Godfrey and his warriors of their grace, and by the description of Godfrey's acts, which shows that he led his kinsfolk out of the lands between when they were tarnished. And in an interview via The Gamer, Miyazaki himself said that Godfrey is the embodiment of the tarnished long history and struggle. So just keep that in mind while we look at Godfrey and his earlier history, that we are looking at the history of the tarnished themselves before they were named such. But we will go into more detail in the tarnished chapter. And while the story of Fortified Manor isn't said directly, I think it is a great example of environmental storytelling. We can see here a warrior culture that becomes outdated by the later culture of Dale, much as the fortified manor itself sticks out like a sore thumb amongst the buildings of Highway Dale. As I said in the prior chapter, something that is really difficult to nail down is when the age of the Crucible truly began. And while I speculate that Horaloo's early conquests were a product of the time, an aggressive era of survival of the fittest, in time, he would codify his beliefs and become more associated with the new emerging power, the Crucible. The earliest sign of this is, of course, his Crucible Knights, who we learn are associated with the Warrior King via their gauntlet set, which reads, Gauntlets of the Crucible Knights, who served Godfrey, the first Elven Lord. And we can only speculate as to when Orlou became associated with this new rising power, and when he became Godfrey, when he took the vow to become a lord. But at some point, he would become joined to another emerging power, the Empyrean Marika, who would become the god of the new Erdtree era, and as such, he would become her consort, an Elden Lord, and no doubt he gained this position through his formidable reputation as a warrior. Martha and her Erdtree adherents would need a warrior. The protection of the Erdtree incantation makes it clear that at the beginning the Erdtree had many enemies to overcome, and thus a warrior like Horaloo was the Elden Lord that Marika needed. And yet, to become Elden Lord, he needed to be more than a barbarian warrior. He had to conduct himself as a lord. And as we know from his Axe's item description, Godfrey did vow to conduct himself as a lord. And at this moment, he transitioned from Horaloo to Godfrey, from a warrior king with a round table council to a more traditional monarch figure. Tarnished archaeologists point out that this is a nuance that is illustrated by Round Table Hall itself. For in one room, we see the level playing field of the Round Table, which stands in stark contrast to the small chamber found off the Round Table, which essentially is a throne room for a lord. One represents a warrior culture of equal voice, and the other represents a traditional monarchy, the complete opposite of a round table philosophy, where one voice stands far above the others. So we can assume that after his ascension to Elden Lord, Godfrey's old holds still continue to be used, and given there is an Elven throne in both Stormvale and Fortified Manor, this is very much implied. Given the more basic and Spartan design of the Norman Fortified Manor, I would suggest that Laendale was built sometime after this building, due to the more grand design and clearer purposeful ties to the Erdtree in its iconography. And given Godfrey's origins, I would like to imagine him as a man who would still have preferred to use his more functional holds, like Stormvale and Fortified Manor, even after more opulent buildings were built in Laendale. There is one final symbol of this transition, of the moment that Horaloo became Godfrey, and again credit to the tarnished archaeologist for pointing out this detail in Fortified Manor. And the detail I am talking about is the weapons that are plunged into the round table itself. Standing starkly among these swords is a single axe. And we know that Godfrey took his iconic double-headed axe at the moment he vowed to conduct himself as a lord. We know what is expected of the lord thanks to the description of the ruler's mask item description, which reads, such a mask illustrates the qualities of an ideal lord, chiefly wise and possessing a certain defined geniality. One at the centre of society often finds these qualities most expedient. Horaloo and his warriors very much are the opposite of these ideals. Yet Godfrey the Lord, a man who speaks with poise and respect, very much comes closer to the ideals described by the ruler's mask. Godfrey is
To
certainly
think we'd
more
meet in such a
defined
place
than
that
Horaloo,
could give you a
warrior.
purpose,
So
possibly.
perhaps these swords being embedded in the table is a
I know
further
well enough who
defining,
you are,
a symbolic moment
and
of
what I
laying
know
down
is
the
good
sword,
enough for me to
Godfrey and
call
his
upon me
warriors
again
giving up their
in
old
battle.
ways, giving up the
Should you
warrior
have to
culture,
lead.
and taking up the symbols of lordship.
I'm
Could
searching for
this
a
truly
fort to
be
the north of the
Godfrey's old
ruins.
functional
I
battle
heard
axe,
the master of the
a
fort
permanent reminder
was given
of
a
the man he
medallion
used to be,
that allowed him to
marking
visit
the
the
end
Halig tree.
of his days as
Indeed,
Horaloo,
I
before
believe
picking
that
up
is
his
where
more
Melania
symbolic
will be
axe
found.
and
The
taking
Halig
Sarosh
tree is
upon
hidden
his
somewhere
back,
in these northern
rising
lands.
as Godfrey, first Elden Lord. Things, of course, dramatically changed for Godfrey
I'm
and the world
searching for a
when
fort to
Martha
the
looked
north of the
to Elvin
ruins.
the
I
primacy
heard the
of the
master of
archery.
the fort
We know
was
from
given a
Malcolm's
medallion
remembrance that
that
Martha
allowed him
was
to
once
visit the Halig
Imperial,
tree.
and thus must have been elected as such during an earlier era, possibly during the same era as Horalu's rise to prominence. From Rani's dialogue about Empyreans, we know that Empyreans are potential candidate gods chosen to usher in a new era. In Martha's case, it is no doubt the emergence of the primordial form of the Urtree, the crucible, that heralded the dawn of a new age that necessitated a new god. Of course, Martha faced a lot of challenges as a young Empyrean, and she and her Urtree would face an uphill battle to become the dominant power in the lands between. The protection of the Urtree incantation reads, in the beginning, everything was in opposition to the Urtree, but through countless victories in war, it became the embodiment of order. The Urtree is so obviously the centre of power in our current era, and it is so hard to imagine that it was anything else. Yet, as this description so clearly states, the Urtree earned its primacy through bloodshed. To further drive this point home, the description of
Greetings.
the Elven
Do
Lord
you hear
armor
the
set,
spirit tuning?
Godfrey's set, says the following. The age of the Urtree began amongst conflict, when Godfrey was lord of the battlefield. This does seem to be one of the bloodiest periods in all of Land Between history, but it would be the one in which Godfrey would cement his legacy as the lord of the battlefield. And it is no doubt in no small part thanks to Godfrey's martial prowess that the Urtree would be victorious and become the primary power in the lands between. So let's talk about this period. No doubt, as a newly minted god, Martha would also have had significant power granted to her. However, given Godfrey's title of Lord of the Battlefield and the many battles attributed to him, I think we can safely say that Godfrey was the biggest factor in unifying the lands between under the Erdtree. Martha and Grace were no doubt aware of Horalu's reputation, and thus this is why Horalu was elevated to the position of Elven Lord, with Martha probably being fully aware that everything was in opposition to her new order. And again, this is where Spanish archaeologists' analogy of Godfrey being like King Arthur comes into place again. King Arthur is credited with creating a blueprint for modern United Kingdom by uniting the disparate United Kingdoms in a post-Roman Britain. And again, we can see Godfrey as that great unifier in the beginning of the age of the Erdtree. And the semantics of the description of protection of the Erdtree really makes it clear that this was a period of lots of bloodshed, because it says through countless victories, the Erdtree would become the symbol of order. And so we can only imagine how much Godfrey and his warriors had to fight. In my own head, I call this era the Erdtree Unification Wars, and no doubt there were countless tribes, minor societies that were crushed and brought to heel by Godfrey and his warriors. The Siege of Morn gives us some insight into what these battles could have been like. So let us look at the grafted greatsword, which reads the following. The storied sword of Castle Morn, a revenger's weapon. It is burdened with oceans of anger and regret. A lone surviving champion from a country now vanished was so determined to continue fighting that he claimed the swords of an entire clan of warriors. This is an interesting description as it suggests the original wielder of the sword was a sole survivor of a lost country, and that revenge was their purpose and
Where
not
have
their
you
might,
been hiding?
symbolically
I took
forging
you
a
for
single
dead.
sword out of
No
all the
matter, it's
swords
all
of
the
the lost
same.
clan, to
How
bring
your arms
vengeance
then?
collectively to the one that perpetrated the loss of this clan. And when we look at this in line with the sword monument found at Castle Morn, we do get the full picture of who this revenge is directed at. The Siege of Castle Morn. A lone hero fights for his vengeance, only to fall at the hand of Lord Godfrey. This is, of course, interesting for a number of reasons. Firstly, it mentions Godfrey, not Horalu, meaning this event took place when Godfrey was Elden Lord. Secondly, it of course shows that the revenge of this lone revenger is directed against Godfrey, implicitly suggesting that Godfrey is responsible for the destruction of the country and clan that is mentioned in said sword's description. And I would suggest that this country and clan was just one of the many that Godfrey would have destroyed in these Erdtree unification wars. And it would eventually result in this final climactic battle between the lone survivor of said country and Lord Godfrey. Now, we don't know if the Revenger was the one that was in possession of Castle Morn, or whether they were besieging, but ultimately it doesn't matter. It's just another one of Godfrey's many victories, another potential enemy destroyed. And obviously, in time, this would become one of Godfrey's holding, whether he held it before this Revenger or took it from him, as it does contain the similar kind of imagery that we find in Stormvale and Round Table Hold, and it is still held by one of Godfrey's descendants, Godric, and his vassals. What is also interesting is that Godfrey didn't actually discard the Revenger's weapon, as we can see from the fact that it becomes the storied weapon of Castle Morn. And indeed, Godric's vassal, Edgar, is determined to recover the weapon before he thinks about abandoning Castle Morn, which has been overrun by misbegotten slaves, suggesting that this sword is of great value now to the golden lineage, a relic of this bloodline. And indeed, at the hilt, you can see it now bears the crest of Godfrey, lying rampant. We've gone into detail about it so many times now. Despite all these more minor victories, two of his greatest victories are detailed in his armor set, the victories against the Stormlord and the Giants. Now, in days past, I'd always assumed that the Stormlord was one and the same with the Stormhawk King, who we've already spoken about in the prior chapters, and I had denied the common theory that the Stormlord was actually the Sidgwick. However, as I always do, I've reconsidered my position on this bit of lore, and I believe that there is a good chance that Godfrey defeated the Sidgwick, and this is the Stormlord mentioned. And thematically, this was the final nail in the coffin of the prior order, one Elden Lord being defeated by the next Elden Lord. Let's start with the Sidgwick's remembrance, which reads, "The Dragon Lord whose seat lies in the heart of the storm, beyond time, is said to have been the Elden Lord in the age before the Erdtree. Once his god was fled, the Lord continued to await its return." Now, there are already a number of hints here as to Sidgwick being the Stormlord that Godfrey takes down. First is the obvious association with storm. Sidgwick exists beyond a storm that is seemingly able to manipulate time somehow. There's also the fact that Sidgwick really is a master or lord of storms, being able to transform himself into a storm cloud and wield what the Cragblade describes as primeval lightning. This, of course, brings us back to the Hawks themselves and their ability to wield storms. Hawks are also present in Farum Azula. Hawks are ultimately raptors, and raptors are distant relations of dinosaurs, so perhaps the hawks of Elden Ring are descendants of the dragons, an analogy to real-world dinosaurs and birds, and thus carried the dragon's affinity for the storm down the genetic line, and that really the true masters of the storm are the dragons, and the hawks owe their manipulation of the storm to the dragons, and ultimately the Sidgwick. One of the strongest pieces of evidence for the Sidgwick being the Stormlord that was defeated by Godfrey is, of course, his wounds. He seems to have lost 3 heads and has had his wings and body damaged by very deep scars, all wounds that very much could have been caused by an axe. And as we discussed in a prior chapter, the age of beasts that was ruled over by the Sidgwick may have more closely overlapped with the age of the Crucible and thus the age of the Erdtree more closely than I had previously considered. And so if Marika and Godfrey were seeking to establish a new order, it would make perfect sense for Godfrey to target the Elden Lord of the prior one. And really, if Godfrey's already defeated the Stormhawk Monarch, Sorosh, It would thematically make sense if he also defeated Placidusax. His order's primacy would really be confirmed and legitimized, with three lords of this prior order being defeated by the new Elden Lord. This is now what I believe when the armor says that Godfrey faced the Storm Lord alone. Elden Lord versus Elden Lord, with Godfrey coming out on top of this conflict and Placidusax retreating to beyond the storm, awaiting his god to return and essentially flapping his wings. And as we already discussed, if Placidusax was the Storm Lord, that meant that the banished knights, including Oleg and Enval, the wings of the Storm Lord, would have previously served Placidusax, but upon Placidusax's defeat, their locations throughout Godfrey's holds suggest that they now serve a different master. With the Storm Lord and the former order finally defeated, Godfrey and Marika would have one final set of rivals to overthrow, the giants that were mentioned in Godfrey's armor, the fire giants, who controlled the mountain forest and the forge of ruinous flame. Obviously, this is one of the most titanic and pivotal battles in this early Erdtree era. It was the battle that marked the dawn of the age of the Erdtree, the importance of which is impressed upon or made by Marika herself in the speech that Melina recreates for us on the mountaintops of the giants.
Hark, brave warriors. Hark, my lord Godfrey. We command your gaze. Guidance hath delivered ye through each ordeal to the place ye stand. Put the giants to the sword and confine the flame atop the mound. Let a new epoch begin, an epoch glistening with life. Brandish the Elden Ring for the age of the Erdtree.
This is a pretty epic campaign, and it is important because it does mark the dawn of a new age, the dawn of the age of the Erdtree. Another thing that is interesting about this speech is where it takes place. Melina recreates it at the first church of Marika, again suggesting that the end of this battle would mark the beginning of the Erdtree era, and Marika's dominance as the god. And no doubt this first church was built in honour of that final victory. Marika makes it very clear that this is the final battle in the way of Erdtree dominance, and that all the many timeless battles that came before it have led to this singular moment. Of course, the reason why the giants needs to be destroyed is perfectly clear. Not only are they powerful, but they also possess the flame of ruin. As we see from our own journey, the flame of ruin does pose a direct physical threat towards the Erdtree. The need for action could well be further spurred by the prophecy of flame, which we hear of in Wildfire's deadly sin, which reads, "The prophet was there, looking up at the Erdtree, for soon the kindling would burst into flame, bringing ruin." The burning of the Erdtree is the first cardinal sin. That is what is the name of the human name. And they have confirmed that this is the first cardinal sin, and given it is the first of the cardinal sins of the Erdtree order, I assume that sin must have been established early on in the Erdtree history. A fear brought about by a prophecy that ultimately pushed Marika and her people to assault the mountain tops and seal the giant. Marika's speech, of course, mentions the word Godfrey, placing Godfrey at her side during this conflict, and we can only imagine the great feats that he and his knights would achieve during this battle. With the trolls betraying them and their ancient Xehanort enemies joining the Earth's alliance, the fire giants really stood no chance and were conclusively defeated. However, as we know, victory here was not complete, for the remembrance of the fire giant reads the following. The fire giant is a survivor of the war against the giants. Upon realizing the flames of their forge would never die, Queen Marika marched them from the troops. Marika and her forces realized that the flames could never truly be extinguished, and thus it must be confined and controlled instead. As we discussed in my Fire Giants more video, which I will link below, the fire giants are bound to serve the flame for eternity. And as a result, Marika used this against the last giant alive. She would let the fire giant catch the fire by itself, acting as a final barrier and guardian against anyone who would try to utilize the flame unruly. Alongside these giants, the Order of Fire Monks was established on the verge of history. Thus would begin the age of the Urges, as we learn by the mental plot ceremony which reads, "The war against the giants, champion battle, trolls betray, fire vanquish. The era of the Urges begins." We know that the early age of the Urges era was marked by bounty and blessing, dropping directly as fuel from the tree itself. We discussed this ancient Urges era in my Global War video, in which I heavily referenced Kurdish archaeologist Creek of the Urges video, and I would highly recommend that video if you'd like to learn more about this potential ancient Urges era. But we learn of this time via Urges Faber description, which is the following. It is said that when the age of the Urges
Horário de defesa,
such
inclusive.
blessings were personally bestowed upon the recipient by Queen Martha herself.
E daqui a pouco
So indeed, we know that this was the earliest part of the age of the Urges, a period which is also known as the age of plenty, via items like the Anton Shield and the blessed New Elephant, the lack of which weeps. It was once thought that the blessed staff of the Urges would drip from its bounds forever, but that age of plenty swiftly came to a close, and in time, the Urges would become more an object of faith. We know that Godfrey was present at this time, as the amber medallions read, "The Urges' old sap becomes amber, treasured as the most precious jewel in the age of Godfrey, the first Elven Lord." So Godfrey was the Elven Lord at this time of the age of plenty. Godfrey would now become regarded as a demigod at this time, and he and Martha would begin to be lauded with the lineage. Something we learn of via Godric's Great Rune, which reads, "The first demigods were the Elven Lord Godfrey and his offspring, the golden lineage." Godfrey and his offspring are still well regarded
Horário de
in
defesa.
the current era. We see Godric clinging so dearly to this golden heritage,
Very good job,
and
Dr.
Kenneth Hyde expresses shock that such a weakling like Godric could be the blood of the venerable Godfrey and golden lineage.
And to think, he's the blood of Godfrey, last of the golden lineage. Then you almost wouldn't know to look at him.
The very term golden of golden lineage tells us how important this bloodline is to the people of the golden tree, to Greys. It is the original royal family branch, and from this branch would come the likes of Godwin the Golden, a family member who would rise to prominence in the war with the dragons, and would also include members like Morgoth, the last king of Leyndell. Of course, we can assume that Leyndell, as we know it today, would began to be built in this early age, and Godfrey would make his mark on early Urges society via his arenas. We know that this was a practice of Godfrey's for multiple reasons. Firstly, it lines up on what we know of Godfrey, a man who values martial prowess, where better to practice such ideals than in the crucible of an arena. Secondly, the archaeological evidence, as we've discussed, also points to Godfrey's hand, as it contains the classic Latin symbolism we have so extensively examined. Finally, there is in-game lore that confirms that these arenas were a Godfrey real practice, that were then shuttered by the time of Radigan when he was Elven Lord. As the ritual sword talisman reads, "A talisman patterned after swords used in ritual combat held to honour the Erdtree." The practice had died out by the age of King Consort Radigan, but remains of the arenas where ritual combat took place can still be found in every land. It is interesting to see that Godfrey, a warrior at heart who developed his own ideals about strength, applies his beliefs and practices to honour his new patron, the Erdtree. Aside from this, we don't know a huge amount about Godfrey's reign as Elden Lord, aside from the fact he must have been around for the late Urnian Wars. We know from Meriel that Radigan would only become Elden Lord after Godfrey was driven from the lands between. And he did this while he was married to Renala, who he would abandon. And this union between Renala and Radigan was the union that ended the Second Late Urnian War, meaning that Godfrey was still Elden Lord at the time of both Late Urnian Wars. Now, thematically, it probably makes sense that the Late Urnian Wars took place during the Erdtree Unification Wars that we detailed in the earlier chapter, because of course, the region of Liurnia with the Carians and Raya Lucaria could have been a massive potential rival to the Erdtree society. However, the reason I haven't placed it in that chapter previously is because I am ultimately unsure where it sits, mainly because of the dialogue by Rogier in which he talks about the Golden Order incorporating the people of the area.
They were conceived at the Great Academy of Raya Lucaria, to the north of this castle. In the past, they obeyed the laws which contravened the Golden Order, or so I'm told. Fascinating, isn't it? That the Golden Order was pliable enough to absorb practices that contradicted itself in the past. With the Order broken, twisted, and in need of repair, such adaptability is more important now than ever.
Implicitly, this suggests that the Liurnian Wars took place when the Golden Order was a thing, so later on in the timeline when death was confined. However, I do concede that Rogier may just be talking about the Golden Order in a general sense and talking about their ancient history prior to it actually being the Golden Order. So I leave it up to you to decide whether these Liurnian Wars took place in the early conquests of the Erdtree or if they took place during the reign of Godfrey after the age of the Erdtree began. However, there is a war that certainly took place later on after the initial wars of the Erdtree when Leyndale was built, and that is the War of the Ancient Dragons. And I would speculate that this did take place under Godfrey's reign. This event is described to us in many in-game sources, such as Golden Lightning Fortification and the relevant sword memorial found in Leyndale. Of course, it is speculation about when this war actually took place, but my reasoning for it taking place under Godfrey's reign is multifold. Reason one, Godfrey is thematically discarded by grace after all his worthy enemies are felled, and for me it implies that Radigan's era is the era of peace when main conflicts are mainly done. And reason number two, as we have already discussed, there's a good chance that Godfrey defeated Prestigisax, and thus it would make sense that the remaining dragons under Grand Sax and Fortisax would try to take revenge against Godfrey and his people sooner rather than later. But again, I leave it up to you to decide where you think this event stands in the timeline, if it took place in Godfrey's reign or later. Of course, we all know where Godfrey's lordship is going. Godfrey and his tribe were martial people, a wartime war that was necessary during the initial Erdtree Unification Wars. But now that victory had been achieved and the last bits of combat were dying out, a different lord was needed. It seems as though after Godfrey and his men had lost their purpose, they lost their usefulness to the Erdtree, and grace fell from their eyes. This is of course described by Godfrey's armor set, which reads, "When his last worthy enemy fell, it was then, as the story is told, that the hue of Lord Godfrey's eyes faded." So we can see that Godfrey's loss of grace was a result of a loss of purpose after the defeat of the last real threat to the Erdtree. Then, of course, we see that it is Marika herself who passes this judgment on Godfrey and his warriors. As she says,
My lord, and thy warriors, I divest each of thee of thy grace. With thine eyes dimmed, ye will be driven from the lands between. Ye will wage war in a land afar,
Hark, brave
where ye
warriors.
will live
Hark, my lord
and die.
Godfrey.
Then,
We commend your
after
deeds.
thy death,
Guidance hath
I
delivered
will
ye
give
through
back
each
what I
ordeal
once
to
claimed,
the place ye
return to
stand.
the lands
Put the
between,
giants to the sword and
wage
confine
war,
the flame atop the
and
mountain.
brandish the
Let a
elden
new
ring.
epoch
Grow
begin,
strong
an
in the
epoch
face of death.
glistening with life.
Warriors of
Brandish
my
the
lord,
Elden Ring for
Lord
the
Godfrey.
age of the
In this
Eight.
speech, Martha more or less describes the exact chain of
Shall I
events
turn your
that happened
wounds
to the
to
Tarnished,
strength?
as if
Let my
she
hand
and
rest
Grace,
upon you.
or the Greater Will,
What
would
about the
foresee
moment?
the greater role intended
Share them with
for the
me.
Tarnished. And what
Your
Martha says
thoughts,
here, right at the
your
moment of their
ambitions,
exile, does come to
the
pass.
principles you would
They are
follow.
chased from the lands between. They do die. And one day they do have Grace return to them, and they come back to the lands between. It seems to be a purposeful decision by the forces that be, by the Greater Will and Marika. And this plan does bear fruit, as it is the Tarnished to become the main players in the current era after the demigods failed to live up to their expectations. So with that said, let us now talk about the Tarnished, their exile, and eventual return. As I've already touched on a couple of times, the Tarnished are descended from these warriors who served beside Godfrey, who were tarnished and exiled at the same time as him. A fact that is confirmed by Miyazaki himself via an interview with IGN, where he said the following about the Tarnished. So the Tarnished, you could call them tarnished individuals who have lost grace, and this is a long time preceding the setting of the game, a long time before. The ancestors of the characters that are present in the world were banished and exiled from the lands between, these tarnished. So these original tarnished who were banished alongside Godfrey, whom we are descended from, are literally Godfrey's warriors, referred to as his kinfolk in Horror's remembrance. So with that said, let us talk about their exile, something we know was not a pretty event, thanks to Marielle, who says the following.
However, when Godfrey, first Elven Lord, was hounded from the lands between, Radagon left Renala to return to the Electric capital, becoming Queen Marika's second husband and the kingly consort, taking the title of Second Elven Lord.
So they were hounded or chased out because of the way in which the people of Grace view those who are tarnished. Something we can see in the disgusted way in which Morgoth or Margit refers to us,
Foul tarnished.
and in the way in which Kenneth Haidt initially reacts to us in regards to us being tarnished and wanting to help him.
You come to lend me your aid, have you? Well, that's very kind, but no, no, the help is very much appreciated, even from a tarnished. Despite appearances, nobility is no prerequisite to serving the true order.
And of course, there would have been cut NPC Viscount Shaneheit, someone we've discussed before on the channel, a noble of Lane who would have made it clear that the tarnished do not belong in the world of grace, and indeed that he believes we are lesser for having lost grace. This is how we make sense of the term itself, the word tarnished. Tarnished is defined in the following way by Oxford Languages. Lose or cause to lose luster, especially as a result of exposure to air or moisture, or make or become less valuable or respected. Both of these are relevant to the tarnished. Not only have they lost the luster of gold from their eyes, indeed gold can become tarnished in real life, but also the tarnished have lost value in the eyes of those in the world of grace. Of course, one of the only characters to speak to us with respect in terms of us being tarnished is Godfrey, which of course makes sense given that he was one of us. To not be touched by grace really is a sense of toxicity, something we can see when we look at other beings who haven't been touched by grace, such as the Albinorics. And the greatest law in the game, Ultimate Bloodclaw, makes it clear how people with grace can use things to gain grace. As it reads, Albinorics are life forms made by human hands. Thus many believe them to live impure lives, untouched by the Earthshape's grace. a prejudice that could certainly be applied to the Tarnished as well. And so the Tarnished were chased out of the lands between for being a lesser being. And we know they eventually left for new lands by a boat. Of course, this obviously makes sense given the lands between isn't connected to any other source of land and is surrounded on all sides by water. But we get more detail about their leaving via the rusted anchor weapon item description, which reads the following. A rusty anchor wielded as a weapon. Each of its 4 flukes is thick and sharp. When the Tarnished left the lands between with their lord, one boat alone was said to have been left behind. And so the Tarnished left with their lord, Godfrey, by a boat. As pointed out by Eridan in his Golden Lineage lore video, there is a good chance that they left from the southern tip of the lands between, from Castle Moor, one of Godfrey's strongholds, as there are many wrecked ships here. It's also interesting to note that one of the churches in this region, the Weeping Peninsula, is called the Church of Pilgrimage, perhaps a reference to the pilgrimage of the Tarnished as they left on the Long March. It is also where Melina recreates part of Marika's tarnishing speech. So yeah, make of that what you will. What is also interesting from this item description is that apparently one boat was left behind, and we can only imagine what horrible fate awaited those tarnished who didn't leave with the rest. In fact, we may not need to imagine. In Vati Vidya's latest Secrets video, he highlights the crucified people found throughout the upgrade. Vati notes that these crucified people are wearing the guilty boots, which have a cut item description, which would be far more interesting than the one found in the now. This cut description would have read, garb of spurned tarnished who were forced into slavery in the lands between. This is pretty much what we'd expect to happen to left behind tarnished, enslaved and brutalized. Another interesting nuance to consider is that Godfrey alone was tarnished from his family, not his offspring, as the Golden Lineage very much still exists in the lands between. So the tarnished people left by boat and would establish societies that existed beyond the boundaries of the lands between. And this is why there is such a diverse choice of background for our tarnished, in both the classes that we can choose as well as the appearance presets. All of these choices show that the tarnished lived in different lands and cultures that developed over time, an idea that I explored in my starting class in more videos, which I would highly recommend. But of course, before the tarnished could settle in these lands, they had to undergo what is known as the Long March, referred to in Godfrey's Acts, which reads the following. Weapon of Godfrey, Elven Lord. Head broken in a battle, fought as leader of the tarnished during the Long March. So we actually get a lot of lore from a small line. Firstly, it obviously tells us that Godfrey led his people, the tarnished, on a long march, no doubt through lands unknowing, to find a home for his people. And number 2, it tells us that the tarnished and Godfrey saw combat in this march, and this combat was ferocious enough that it would end up in the breaking of Godfrey's legendary axe. Obviously, we can't know for sure who Godfrey and his tarnished fought against, but my speculation is that Godfrey and the tarnished were simply battling against people whose lands they were essentially invading or marching from. Godfrey would eventually settle in an area of known as the Badlands, as the introductory slides call him Oralu, chieftain of the Badlands. Indeed, when the Long March of the Tarnished came to an end, he divested himself of lordship and became Oralu once more. And this is fulfilled by his remembrance, which reads, after the Long March of the Tarnished came to an end, Godfrey divested himself of kingship, becoming a simple warrior once more. This meant that he was still Godfrey, as he led the Tarnished on their long march and then to their exile. But eventually, when he settled, he took off his Godfrey persona. He wasn't a lord anymore. He had done his duty for his people, and he just wanted to become a simple chieftain once more. Despite this, Oralu still had Tarosh on his back, meaning that while he was simple Oralu again, he didn't suffer from the same bloodlust that he did before. And it looks like Sarosh would have still been his advisor at this time, as indeed we do see Sarosh on Horley's shoulder in the introductory slide. As we have already stated, Horley imported some of his ideals from the lands between, especially the Hawk, with his Badland kinsfolk wielding Stormhawk axes, and as we discussed earlier, Nephili Rue let slip that she once had a hawk, suggesting that the Badlands people potentially had hawks as companions and hunting beasts. And as we have said already, the Badlands may well have been like Stormvale due to a line from Nephili. This could be why Horror was sensitive here in the first place, a little reminder of home and something familiar. And if Stormvale is like the Badlands, you can get an idea of its potential geography and weather conditions. Indeed, Badland culture is a return to Horror's more simple barbarian days, as is evident by the description of the champion set, where again, strength and martial prowess is valued over all things. Clearly some tarnish settled with Horror here, as when creating our tarnished avatar, we can make them the hero class, suggesting that our character is descended or from this Badlands clan. Horrorloo evidently went on to have more children after he settled in the Badlands, as we meet one of his tarnished descendants, Nephili Lou, whose lineage is evidenced by Kenneth Height supporting her valid claim to the seat of Stormvale.
And now, I must begin my search post-haste for a true and stalwart lord of the proper lineage to take the reins of Limgrave. Ah, quite. I have indeed selected a new ruler. Lady Nephili is strong and just, worthy of the burden of Limgrave's lineage.
But the Badlands were not the only resting place of the tarnished. The starting classes tell us much in this regard. There are tarnished warriors from the land of reeds, if you would choose the samurai class, and or the lands of reed appearance preset. There are tarnished who were once of the Newman people, Marcus people, if you choose the Newman appearance. In my mind, if you choose the Newman appearance, that means that your ancestors were once Marcus people in the lands between, before being tarnished and exiled alongside Godfrey. A pretty interesting bit of lore if you consider it. There is also a nomadic clan of warriors, of which Tarnished also seems to be members of. A nomadic trade which upholds the often stolen techniques of the blind swordsman, not only in their combat style, but also in their nomadic way of life. Even in the way they live, their teachings demand that they move like flowing water. Such is the lore of the Tarnished who choose the warrior starting class, with this rich lore being detailed in their armor set. What's also interesting is that there are tarnished who seem to be part of a church that worships the two fingers even outside of the lands between. Something we learn of via the Confessor set, which reads, "Black hood for blending in with the darkness, worn by church confessors. The churches outside the lands between, dedicated to the teachings of the two fingers, send confessors out to follow the guidance of grace. The confessors are loyal servants to the two fingers, ready to hunt down and quietly dispose of their enemies." Now, it is unclear whether people outside of the land between already worship grace and the two fingers, or whether it was an export brought by the Tarnished after their long march. I am more inclined to believe the latter, not only because it's more interesting, but also because the Tarnished have very strong ties to the two fingers, as we will discuss shortly. The point being that the Tarnished evidently dispersed far and wide throughout the world, having different classes, different religions, and different nations that they come from. The interview quote from Miyazaki that we looked at the start of this chapter definitely means that makes sense. He describes that the initial exile took place long, long ago, and that we are actually ancestors of those originally Tarnished, meaning that there has been a long passage of time since the Tarnished were originally exiled, giving there a lot of time for the Tarnished people to spread far and wide, to become embedded in different societies, and in essence it gives us a wide blank canvas when we create our local characters in Elden Ring. And so while the Tarnished were living their new lives beyond the lands between, we know that major things were going down in the lands between. As we know from Martha's speech, her prediction, the Tarnished would one day be required to return to the lands between. Far from Tarnished lands, the lands between would go through a tumultuous period, especially the Shattered. The Elden Ring was shattered, and Martha's demigod offspring would battle for supremacy in a war so brutal that no one would truly be victorious. Their failure to herald in order would lead to their abandonment by the greater will, as told to us in the introductory segment. With the demigods abandoned, the greater will and the two fingers would once again extend grace to their last hope, the Tarnished.
Queen Marika, she who is vessel of the Elden Ring, tainted by the strength of their wounds, her children warred, but none could become Elden Lord. And so grace was extended to your kind, the Tarnished. Listen, the fingers speak. The greater we has long renounced the demigods. Tarnished, show no mercy. At their heads, take all they have left.
This, in a nutshell, is why the Tarnished are A, given back their grace, and B, called back to the lands between. They are the last chance for a new order to be restored, and one of them to become Elden Lord. Not only are they called back, but it seems as though most of the Tarnished are resurrected from death. In the opening cinematic, we see that Orlu, Gideon Ophir, Dungeon, and Goldmask were all dead, but in each image, we see the light of grace next to them, as if, in the following scene, they will be resurrected from the dead. Even ourselves, the Tarnished of little renown, seem to be dead at the beginning of the game, with grace returning to us, and we come back to life. This brings us to a question a lot of people have about the Tarnished. Why do they not die, and why do other Tarnished seem to die? Well, the opening cinematic of our character being resurrected is really the answer. It is grace. Consider what grace is apart from a magical force. It is purpose. As long as the Order has a purpose for us, we will be needed. We know that it was when Godfrey's purpose ended that the light faded from his eyes. When we have grace and have purpose that is granted to us, remember, it isn't about just internal purpose. It is about the system of order having a purpose for you. We cannot die. And this force is so powerful that not only does it stop us from dying, but it actually resurrects us and others back from the dead. And if you don't believe me, this idea is actually confirmed by Miyazaki himself. In an interview from Overture of Elden Ring, Miyazaki says the following about immortality. The immortality of the Tarnished stems from the power of guidance of grace. Tarnished that die outside the lands between are given new life through the guidance of grace and destined to the lands between. This is basically the start of the game. I guess the guidance doesn't want the player character to be free from this cycle. So that's it pretty simply put. We have a role to play in the current order, and as such, we will not be allowed to die until we have fulfilled that purpose or we are no longer of use. This does raise questions for me about Godfrey. We know that he lost grace when his purpose faded, but does this mean that when he was Elden Lord and needed by the current order, was he actually immortal? Did that play a role in his victories? Not to take anything away from him, of course. It just adds another interesting dynamic that maybe the forces of grace were literally unstoppable for all those that opposed them if their main champions were literally immortal. But let's swing around to another question I get a lot, which is why are we immortal?